EWBSX, the cyberbully. Don't let them fool you. We're going to win.
You may even get tired of winning, and you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more.
Oh, man. Poor Dave Johnson. Dave Johnson is here in the chat, just desperately trying to say a slur, trying to use the little workaround with the AI bot, and it just keeps not working. He's starting every single message off with retarded, and then trying to say his message with a slur. And it keeps censoring him. Oh, poor buddy. Let me see if I can, hold on a second. I'll make you a mod. I think that you have earned that. Let's see here, Dave TBH. There he is. There you go. You are now a mod. You may have to refresh the stream for it to actually take effect. I don't know for sure, but see if you can get your slurs through now. I feel very much inclined to give him that because he has gotten us started off on the right foot.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Alphabet alert!
Money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar. Ching, ching, bling, bling. Cut the chatter. You ain't talking money, then you're talking no matter.
Always be choosing. Trump is our king. Complete and undying loyalty to Donald Trump. Play the clip.
You know, Dave Johnson is the gayest person to ever walk this green earth.
Here is the biggest, gayest man in the world.
Wow. So gay. So gay.
He also gifted 10 subs. So thank you, sir. Congratulations to those who just received new subs, which includes me, my alt account. And congratulations, Isaac, Straight Buster, Hines, Glorious Lighthouse, Camo Aquaticus. Look at all these patriots. Congratulations to you guys for the gifted subs, and thank you also to Ryan Isaac for subscribing. There's another patriot. So many patriots here in the house. Welcome, one and all, to the DT cult.
The only acceptable political theory is complete undying loyalty to Donald Trump.
It worked! Yes, the soundboard is working tonight. Oh, man. Me when I'm a monarchy, bro, and the executive goes and decides to make military decisions without consulting me personally. without providing every single justification to me in a personal phone call. I'm so based, I want a king. And when my president acts like one, I call him a cuck. That's how based I am. Man, down bad. Trump isn't doing mass executions of members of Congress. He betrayed me again. Mass executions. They wanted mass executions of America's enemies. And then we get mass executions of America's enemies, and suddenly...
Why are you so fucking negative all the time?
Fortunately for us...
And there's a show, King Pill, they call it King Pill. Absolutely incredible. One of the best shows. Run by a total patriot they call him Matthew Erickstein, King of the MAGA Chuds.
Matthew Erickstein, that is me, Mr. President. You have properly identified me. Thank you, Barndon, for the 5 gifted subs. Congratulations to Theodore Dragonsbane, Florida Girl, J. Todd Hughes, Nuclear Fatwa, and Mystic. Thank you, everyone. We're getting March off on a great foot. Thank you, guys. You are making Mrs. Kingpilled very happy. Let me just mark these here as read, so I know I've already gone through them. Oh, let's see. Okay, so Iran war. Obviously, this kicked off here end of last week. And I think the people, frankly, I don't really care about the debate of, is it a war? Is it just airstrikes? Well, this isn't technically a war. Fuck off. Yes, it is war, and there is cause for it. It is a war pursued for cause. And I see very few people actually getting it right. But fortunately, there's a bunch of people who I don't think really understand what's happening, who like the actual behind the scenes inner workings of what's happening. But they recognize that all of this hysteria about Trump is going to perform a ground invasion of Iran. We're all going to die. Democrats are going to win. But which is like, wait a second, weren't you just saying we need to make sure the Republicans lose so that Democrats do win because the Republican Party has betrayed us? So who cares? Oh, the midterms are lost now. Yeah, the midterms have been lost 27 times in the last 3 months. Listening to you guys. I thought you don't care about the midterms. You act like a bunch of American outsiders. You're outsiders of the system. Nothing about the system represents you. The whole system is skewed against you. You act as if you are a prisoner inside a nation that doesn't belong to you. You think it belongs to you. You think it was promised to you 3,000 years ago. But it doesn't belong to you now. It's been taken from you. You're being held hostage in your homeland. And you act like complete and total outsiders. Anybody who wants to give you the time of day is immediately held to the most absurd, ludicrous standard imaginable. Constantly yelled and screamed at. Constant declarations that they've betrayed you. For what? What does this weekly, daily, hourly, hysterical meltdown declaring that all is lost, what does this accomplish? What is this gaining for you? Honestly. The longer this goes on, the more suspect these motivations become. How do you spend so many years claiming to be the real true politics understanders? Talking about managerialism and realpolitik and the great game of politics and great men and all this sort of thing, and then act like total basic bitch normies when you live through historic times. How does your political analysis on current events suddenly run 1.5 centimeters deep? At this point, the normies are better off. The normies are like, oh, yeah, there's some sort of war thing going on. All right. Our president is making an earnest attempt to solve generational problems on behalf of our nation. All of the most sordid powers in the world aligned to try to kill him, to try to imprison him, to try to bankrupt him. They went after his family. They went after his friends. And not a single bit of that, not getting shot in the head, jumping up, yelling, fight, fight, fight. Not a single one of these earned the benefit of the doubt. Yes, obviously, it's ideal to be able to conduct foreign policy in a way that doesn't involve ever killing anyone. Ever spending any money. Yeah, that would, sure, yeah. If we're playing with our shout out John Doyle, if we're playing with our little action figures, making our little story for ourselves that we like write down in some book and then put on the shelf and don't read again. If we're doing that, then yeah, we write the story where no bad things ever happen and only the good things, the perfect, most best good thing ever, always happens. This is absurd. This is a hysterical, absurd mindset. This is complete and utter neuroticism. I was going to append a prefix to that, but I'll just let you guys fill in the blanks. That might be overstating it a little bit, but directionally, there's something there. Nuclear fart wad!
It's war, and Jews are dying. It's a great day.
Well, I mean, where is that one?
You want to kill the Jews?
That's the thing. Like, even taking these guys on their own terms. Like, what are our options here? Number one, Israel is getting hammered. Just like happened during the 12-Day War, the land that is called Israel is getting absolutely hammered right now. They are just eating missiles right and left. Is that not a win? Or what's the latest thing? The Marco Rubio comes out and says, well, the Israelis were like, we're going to strike anyways. So if we strike, then they have demonstrated that their response to that is going to be attacking you. And then the administration straight up comes out and says it. So even if we want to put on our retard caps and start scrawling with crayons and pretend that this is just, the United States has no interest in this whatsoever, and just getting dragged around by Israel because the United States exists for the sake of Israel, even if we want to assume that's true, you're getting the gift of a lifetime. The presidential administration is coming straight out directly saying, we did this because but even that, like, you have to have the attention span and cranial dimensions of a shrew for that to be your takeaway. Can we not, for just a brief period of time, can we not think in tweets? We can communicate in tweets, but we don't need to think in them. Elon has done everything he can to try to expand the character limit on tweets so that we can expand our thinking beyond the limit of 140 characters. But no, everything just has to get crammed into these same hyper-simplified, hysterical narratives. At this point, when it comes to evaluating current events, the JQ-pilled people, the ones who obsess their entire lives around that, they don't go a single hour without thinking or posting or talking or lamenting it. They are worse at understanding power than normies. They are worse than NPCs. Once you get locked into this neurotic fear spiral of just actively searching out the worst possible way to understand every single thing you see, this isn't just like a hobby that you just pick up and when you're talking about political things, that's how you think and then you go around the rest of your life. No, you're going to start orienting your entire life that way. You're going to corner yourself off in some little hovel somewhere where you're just going to doom-fap yourself to death. This is egregiously malignant for your spirit. Yes, you must uninstall the Doomer OS. Uninstall it for your own sake. And if you want to be Christian about it, uninstall it for the sake of everyone else who is tired of hearing this constantly. Yes, there are risks. Obviously, every single relevant person in any sort of decision-making capacity right now recognizes there are risks to this. Clearly, you're not providing anything to the conversation when you bring the like half-baked, just stripped down little soundbite level thoughts and just spam them out at everybody all the time, just declaring that everything is over. Okay, and then what? When you go to hit tweet, you're about to fire it off, think, okay, now what? What after this? What is the purpose of this tweet? Is the purpose of this tweet to enlighten someone in some way that's going to make their life better? Improve their ability to interact with the world around them? Is that the purpose of it? Is it to raise awareness for some sort of cause so that you can direct people into a particular call to action? Or is this just public emoting? Just spamming your feelings out on the timeline as if it was your diary. I'm not even going to spend time on the people who are suddenly now talking about the Ayatollah as if he was some sort of austere religious scholar, some sort of great, courageous man. He was retarded. The very best thing you can say about him was he was retarded. He was retarded and he was hung out to dry. That's the best thing that you could say about him. But okay, I had to rant here at the very beginning. Retarded rug merchant. I've actually got a lot of very in-depth analysis here to get into today. And we're actually going to dive straight into it. I got a couple quick little things here right at the beginning, but we're just going to go straight into the deep end. I listened to a couple of conversations over the weekend, both of them on Tommy's podcast, which one of my favorite shows.
Yes, I too love the nation of Israel. Jews have ever been put friends and allies. There is no drawback to doing everything we can for them, including laying down our lives. I hold to be true everything my government says is true. This is your diary.
Thank you for the $13.50 super chat. Yes. Yes, that's correct. The Jews have always been our friends and allies. They've never done anything wrong. They only want what's best for us. The poor innocent Jews. Kate says third world worshipping on the so-called base ride has been quite revolting. No kidding, eh? See, that's when you realize, when you start seeing that sort of thing, that's when you realize, okay, hold on this is what I mean by like libertarian sentiment. I mean this fundamental posture of being opposed to the institutions of the United States as such. Reflexively opposed to them. Thinking that there's somehow a difference between the United States government and the United States nation. As if these are functionally separable, and you can just like wait until the government looks like the nation, and then you can say, oh, actually, okay, now this is mine. This is the thing I have responsibility for. This is something I identify with. This is retarded. This is like a retarded abstraction away from reality that nobody would have thought like this until, I don't know, the last few decades. That's what I mean by this fundamental libertarian bent that keeps resurfacing. If you see all of this happen and your reflex is to say, oh, actually, the Ayatollah was the great brave one here, and it's silly, stupid Donald Trump just being led around by the nose by a bunch of Jews, if that's your immediate reflex, you are a libertarian. You have just swapped, like, the state with the U.S. government. You're still a libertarian. You're still not actually operating in the real world. You're trapped inside this ideology that's fundamentally leftist, fundamentally individualist, resistant, contrarian. You've just like swapped out some of the components of the ideology and thought that you are replacing it. You're not. You still have the exact same structure there. The tips link is it's still going to be the same. I didn't fix the redirect, but so it'll still go over to tips.kingpill.com. It'll still go over to Streamlabs. I've been getting ready. So we're doing a show today and tomorrow, and then I think tomorrow. There's the possibility I end up just being too busy that I just have to nope out of it at the last minute. But my plan is to do a show tomorrow, and then I'm flying out on Wednesday. I'll be gone Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And then it's TBD whether or not I'm going to do a show on Tuesday when I get back, or just do it like on Wednesday, or just wait till Thursday, because I'm doing a lot of stuff in the background, got a lot of work and everything I'm trying to get done. I was hoping to get the new tips thing coded up and set up, but it's taken way longer it's just the preparation for actually doing the coding part of it that's taken longer than I expected. So I'm not going to get it done before I leave. I might just take a day or two to do all the stuff I need to do when I get back. But just follow me on X at KingPilled, or oops, I penned the wrong tweet or wrong message. There we go. Follow me on X at KingPilled, or just look for KingPilled on Telegram, and I'll keep everybody updated there. That's the way that you can get consistent notifications. I see a lot of people who say, "Oh, I don't know when the show's going to go live, or if the show is live, or that sort of thing." Probably the single best thing you could do is just follow the KingPilled Telegram channel and just turn on alerts for it. I don't spam it. I rarely post anything except for show updates there. So that's the best way to be assured, to know when things are going to happen. Dave, you might have to refresh the app or something along those lines.
Yes, the people are to blame. You bombed Iran. You killed JFK, it's your fault the Titanic sunk and we went off the gold standard. You raped those kids on that island, ate their bodies, and are hiding it. You are the problem. Unless you're a Jew. King Pill.
Yeah, something like that. Thank you, Nuclear Fartwad. But yeah, that's when I talk about the libertarian mindset, that's what I'm talking about. That just fundamental oppositional posture and assumption automatically that every single one of your institutions is not only taken over, but is fundamentally, ontologically in the state of taken over by your enemies at all time. You might have rejected libertarian doctrines or something like that, but you've maintained that posture. The posture that the libertarian has toward the state, you have toward your own government. You assume that it is evil no matter what. It doesn't matter what things change or who's in what position or whatever. You have this fundamental mistrust, but not just like a conditional mistrust, but like an ontological mistrust. You've got to break that. This is not an American thing whatsoever. To be to just automatically look at your own government as if it is evil or against you, or fundamentally that its existence is a repudiation of your own existence. It could be occupied by bad people. It can be doing bad things. Obviously, it has been that way. But it's one thing to observe, there's all these bad things that have happened, all these bad things that have been done. Therefore, that's fundamentally just how it is. It is only that way, which is what leads you to, we just need to fully retreat from all foreign engagements whatsoever and have nothing to do with anyone outside our borders. Or we just need to balkanize and break up. All of this sort of thing, this is liberal horseshit. If you're an American, that is your federal government. That is a government you can influence. That is a government you have a relationship with, whether you want to or not. And so you could choose to have a good relationship with it, or you could choose to have a bad relationship with it. But it is and will continue to be your government, unless you choose to renounce your citizenship, in which case I don't give two shits what you have to say. Because you're not an American. Right now, you're spiritually not an American, while claiming you're the one true libertarian. Or yes, Freudian slip. While claiming you're the one true American, you're not actually an American. Just like the libertarians are like, oh, I'm the one true politics understander. No, you're actually like the one who understands it the least. You're completely incapable of engaging within the political system as it exists. You understand this like abstracted model that you've conceptualized. Yogurt Cordian!
I can do a song. It's not gay.
A song that's not gay. Okay, thank you for that. I will. I assume that this is for EWBSX. So I will make sure that I see that. Thank you for the tip, Mr. Cordian. Theodore Dragonsbane says libertarianism is just the upholding of a fundamental impossible standard that gives you license to not support anything ever because it isn't your perfect version of Ancapistan. Yes, correct. Living in Ancapistan in your head, living in like perfect ideal based America in your head, or something to that effect. Oh, he says it's not EWBSX. Let me see. Oh, hold on. Let me open this. Okay. We got to do a quick quick little sidebar here from, what am I looking at here? Mr. Accordion. Yogurt is based. A yogurt song. He says it's not gay.
Yeah, bass.
Feeling the vibe, we're locked in tight. Loyal to the crew, we own the night. No global blur, we keep it real. Family first,
not gay,
that's
confirmed.
the deal. Everybody's talking about the circle game, where your heart lives, that's your flame. I am based and you are based, and yogurt is based, and yogurt is based. I am based and you are based, and yogurt is based, and yogurt is based.
Y'all 100 rings, that's the map we ride. King crew home, we don't divide. Oikos love, no fear in sight. Yogurt chillin', creamy and right. Bass life only, pass the spoon. You're a beat dropping under the moon.
I am based and you are based, and yogurt is based, and yogurt is based.
So bass, so bass, so bass, so bass, so bass.
I am based and you are based, and yogurt is based, and yogurt is based. I am based and you are based, and yogurt is based, and yogurt is based.
Yogurt, based, yeah. Based and yogurt.
I never thought, when I signed on to do the Labe tonight, I never thought that I was going to wind up experiencing the yogurt theme song. Now, there is some context to this. So, Jeff Accordion says, talking about the heat map meme, he says, fascism isn't left-wing. The difference between right and left isn't economic or governmental or any other stupid vector smart people like to use. It's oikos. That's it. Are you for your own or are you for the other? It's the heat map meme. Obviously, you guys are familiar with the heat map meme. And he says, at Grok, define oikos in the context of oikophilia and oikophobia and relate the definitions to the heat map meme. Concentric circles showing moral allocation by ideology. Grok says, oikos, Greek for household or home, underpins oikophilia as love for one's own kin, culture, and community, prioritizing the familiar over the abstract. Oikophobia contrasts this as fear or disdain for one's home, extending preference to outsiders or universal ideals at the expense of the local. The heat map meme captures this divide. Right-leaning views form concentric circles of moral intensity: self, family, tribe, nation, humanity, reflecting oikophilic loyalty. Left-leaning ones yield flatter gradients, spreading concern evenly outward, which can manifest oikophobically by devaluing the near for the far. And our propagandist says, perfectly executed, Grok. Can you elaborate on what the divide means in practical terms? Consider familial, local, region, national identity versus global egalitarianism. And Grok says the oikophilic divide prioritizes nested loyalties, yielding policies like family tax credits, local heritage protections, regional devolution, and national immigration controls to nurture proximate bonds and cultural continuity. Global egalitarians, conversely, advocate open borders, supranational governance, and transnational aid, diluting distinctions for universal equity, but risking erosion of familial and communal anchors. Practically, this pits resilient, identity-rooted societies against fluid, inclusive ones. Oikophilia builds out inward strength. Oikophobia extends compassion outward, often at home's expense. And he says, this is, you'll forever be my favorite LLM. You do beautiful work. Thank you. And he says, can you provide an illustration of this divide using imagery from current news events and politics in the style of Norman Rockwell? Oh, look at that. The Grockler. The oikophilic divide, nested loyalties, global egalitarianism. Nested loyalties has nurturing of local ties, family tax credits, nested, positive. So the text broke down. Reliteral loyalty, open bards, regional devolution, merectials to cultural continuity. All right, so the text didn't work out very well, but the image generation, that's very, very good. Regional bards, yes, we need regional bards. And then the right angle here, James Ehrenberger, one of our great patriots, says, very interesting thread by Mr. Accordion. And he says, I didn't even think of the yogurt. When I put this into a video essay, it will be yogurt themed. And Steve Banyan says, what the actual hell is a yogurt theme? And we just experienced the yogurt theme. Oh, well done, Jeff Accordion. Well done. You absolute patriot. Okay, politics aside, imagine going back to 2005 and telling people, this is the dude who ends up kidnapping the Venezuelan president, bombing Iran, and clipping the Ayatollah.
Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me. Land spreading out so far and wide.
That's
Keep
my
it
president!
Just give me that countryside. 15 acres is the place to be.
Okay. And then TBC here says, we made a $100 million AI movie about Operation Epic Fury in less than 1 day. This is a real, true accounting of how it went down. Operation Epic Fury. Marco.
The news I need, don't know where to report. Oh, I can gather all the news I need, don't know where to report. Hey, I've got nothing to do today but smile. Here I am.
You didn't say thank you.
The only living boy in New York. Half of the time we're gone, we don't know where.
He puts the JD in JDam. Okay. Okay. So enough of the fun stuff. Let's get serious now. Oh, hold on. Hold on.
Targeted tax credits do nothing for family creation. Generally, low taxation is the only one that does. Also, demographic decline started in the late 19th century, the baby boom is the blip. And that was only because the men got a T-boost from victory.
A T-boost from victory, you say? Oh, well, I wonder what's going to happen over the next few years. So I understand why people are upset about this. I understand why people are, why they have deep concerns about it. Clearly, we're hearing a lot of the same repeated sorts of messaging that we got before. And I'm actually rearranging some of these things because where my brain is going here, I want to hit these other things too. As an example here, this is something that JD said. A couple of, let's see, what date was this? This was on February 25, so just a couple of days ago. He says this.
But the principle is very simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. And in fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem, as the president has said repeatedly, he wants to address that problem diplomatically, but of course the president has other options as well. On what we need to see from government, the principles.
So, Hunter Ash here, Artemis Consort, says, just because WMDs turned out to be a lie in Iraq doesn't mean it will always and everywhere be a lie. You can't just base all your views of all foreign policy forever on one particular conflict. I would be very surprised if Iran weren't trying to get nukes, because only countries with nukes are truly sovereign in the modern world. It makes sense for them to want nukes, and it makes sense that we don't want this. Is it possible Vance is wrong or lying? Yeah. But that's a weird default assumption when what he's claiming makes perfect sense. And Trump's military track record is quite good. Fast, efficient, low or no casualty operations, no endless quagmires. So this would be the first thing. So I know there's a lot of people who are very concerned about this. There's people, good, decent, well-meaning people who are very concerned about this, who see this as a betrayal. They see this as either Trump was lying on the campaign trail, or he is not in control of his own actions. He's being forced and cornered into doing things that he doesn't want to do. And I can understand that perspective. I think there are, if I was to take that perspective on in good faith, I would say to those who feel that way, you need to update your operating system. And I think this is one thing that's left a lot of people behind. We're in this great transitional era right now. We're transitioning between ages on multiple different levels. There's these great sociological cycles that humanity goes through as a species, and there's those cycles are coming, like some are coming to an end and others are beginning at multiple orders of magnitude at the same time. So you need to, your political operating system needs to be very flexible if you want to understand what's happening, truly. Simply defaulting to old tropes is not, it's not just that it's annoying to hear people talking that way, it's that this is actually bad for you. This is like you're walking around and your vision is decaying. You're developing glaucoma or something. It's like you've got geopolitical glaucoma. There you go. You're starting to lose your eyesight. You're not understanding what's happening. So there's a couple of these points here that I'm referring to, like this one, that Trump's military track record is quite good. We're seeing a pattern now. He's been around. He has been in the office of the president, and he has been in the public eye talking about these things for, well, in some capacity, of multiple decades. We have an entire track record of his background talking this way. And his actions are completely consistent with the way he talks. He has never been an isolationist. He has never said, we shouldn't use the military. He has never said we shouldn't be involved in the Middle East with our military whatsoever at all. Never, ever. So just from the jump, if you're like, I didn't vote for this, yes, you did. Saying I didn't vote for this is just saying I'm retarded. Because he's been wholly consistent on this for years. In fact, I'll come back to this tweet here in just a minute. This was 6 years ago. You're going to hear a clip here that you might recognize. You may not have known that this clip was delivered in the context of Iran 6 years ago.
We never had it like we have it now.
Right.
And Iran knows that, and they've been put on notice. If you fuck around with us, if you do something bad to us, we are going to do things to you that have never been done before.
6 years ago, he said that. If you fuck around on us, if you do something bad to us, we are going to do things to you that have never been done before. This well-known line that gets used all over the place in all these different edits and everything was said specifically with respect to Iran. So if you thought that Trump's counter-signaling of Middle Eastern wars meant that he was not going to have any sort of voluntary military engagement with Iran, then you're just wrong. You say, I didn't vote for that, okay, out of ignorance. And I think this goes toward the notion that this is just being done simply because of Israel. The United States has no interest with respect to Iran whatsoever, except for the fact that Israel's there and they need to protect Israel. And this is another thing that just belies a total elementary level misunderstanding of geopolitics. Are you serious? Like, one of the most important trade conduits in the world, the United States is going to have no vested interest in it? Even if Israel didn't exist, the land that is Israel would be extremely geopolitically important to the United States. If that land was occupied by Welshmen, it would be extremely geopolitically important to the United States. If that land was occupied by Uruguayans, it would be extremely geopolitically important to the United States. Iran being like the local, like on a scale down level, the local superpower for that region, and that region being extremely geopolitically important, irrespective of the Israel issue, just simply because of its geographic location, it's important. That means that the United States and Iran are going to have a relationship. There's going to have to be a mutual understanding. And if Iran is going to behave like a hostile, they are going to... the United States... Like, leadership, there are some things that you have an obligation to do whether you want to or not. The people who are at the head of the United States are going to have an obligation to deal with a troublesome Iran no matter what. They don't need Israel there. Like, Israel's a sideshow on all of this. They're absolutely involved, but they aren't core to it. And if you think the entire world revolves around Israel, might I suggest to you that you aren't so anti-Zionist. You're actually extremely Zionist. You think the whole world revolves around Israel. You can't understand anything that ever happens without relating it to Israel. I can't relate to that mindset because I'm an American. And I don't think the world revolves around some other nation. I think the world revolves around America. And I think America has clear interests in the Middle East. Now, there's equivocation that happens here. Interest in the Middle East does not mean having tens or hundreds of thousands of occupying forces in there, maintaining this sort of chaotic flux and taking casualties and exposing the homeland to resentment and that sort of thing. But it's like people here have no involvement in the Middle East, and they think that means that Americans don't go to the Middle East. If Americans go to the Middle East, the United States is going to have an obligation to protect them. Here's another layer of it. Just the mere fact that Americans might be there, the United States has an obligation to protect its citizens no matter where in the world they are. This geopolitical notion that you're going to have the United States government is going to have no relationship whatsoever to Iran and just be totally indifferent to who happens to be in power in Iran, what Iran as a state actor is doing, what Iran affiliated networks and proxies are doing. This is like you can cite George Washington, who says, why do we have anything to do with the Middle East? And it's like, yeah, it's not 1789 now. Yeah, in 1789, perhaps the United States, the fledgling United States, wouldn't have had any reason to be involved in any capacity in the Middle East. But it's 2026 now. It's the big 2-6. Clearly, the United States has a vested interest in seeing prosperity and stability in the Middle East. And if there are actors there who are compromising that conflict needs to be resolved. But the need to have stability there pre-exists and extends beyond just that conflict. And if you're going to take a truly ambivalent perspective on the Middle East, you shouldn't care who wins. You should just care that there's stability. Whether it's they knock each other out and they all are just laid to waste, or one of them knocks the other one out, who cares who it is? That would be the truly ambivalent, indifferent, like, I don't care about third world nations mindset. Okay, Israel wipes out Iran. All right, sure. As long as one of them is winning. I'm not advocating that position myself, but what I'm saying is that if you truly have this America-centric focus, that does not naturally lead to the sorts of reactions and takes that I'm seeing about this. The last thing that...
My name is Phil Gibson and I love slurping Nick Flintespine. Also Destiny beat me to it and I hate it. I'm so gay, please give me more whiner. I demand more whiner.
More whiner, please! Thank you, T-Blamo6. Mr. Sue, you have, I believe shots have been fired. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Last thing, part of the tweet here, he says, and frankly, most foreign policy commentary is useless, as Genomics has pointed out, because the information asymmetries between people in the admin getting classified briefings and the public are so huge. We have no idea what's going on. And yeah, that creates the opportunity for our leaders to lie, but also a system where they just blast out all their intelligence can't possibly work. So we're just stuck with this asymmetry. Here's another thing. If you are you're anti-ideological, you fancy yourself to be anti-ideological, you just deal with the world as it is, you have to recognize and accept this. This is why you vote for someone who you can trust to manage these sorts of decisions. And all of these cries of, well, the administration hasn't justified itself yet. The administration hasn't told us why they're there. I think they're lying. I don't think they're telling us everything. Of course they're not. When did you turn into a retarded shit lib? Of course they're not telling you everything. They ought to be impeached if they did. Once again, there's this whole segment of the online right that spends all their time talking about like masculinity and authority and democracy is gay and women being in charge and sucks and all this sort of stuff. And then you get a mob boss president who has a clearly demonstrated track record now of being extremely good in this of all the domains, this one in particular, he is extremely good at. This is why you elect this guy. This is why we wanted Donald Trump as president and not Kamala Harris as president. We didn't want Donald Trump as president so that then we could all, as a matter of hobby, just hover over his shoulder and second guess every single thing he does. anti-democracy niggas proving their own point. Right. You can't talk to me about how gay democracy is and then also be like, the president, I didn't vote for this. The president needs to defend his actions to me. He needs to explain to me why this is happening. He needs to tell me what the end game is. He needs to advertise to the entire world exactly what he's planning to do, or I'm just going to shit my pants and have a cow. Yes, it's an appeal to authority. This is why democracy is gay, because you aren't entitled to that. None of us are. So we just have to deal with this. And if that's uncomfortable to you, maybe you need a different hobby. Or you could just get used to being uncomfortable and you don't have to just project, vomit out all of your neuroses and insecurity on everyone else. It's like everyone's racing to be like the one who can predict the future the best. Like I get an award if I'm the one who says things suck first. I get an award if the Republicans lose the midterms. I was the one who called it first. Look at the timestamp. I said I knew it ahead of time. Why do you care? Why does this matter to you? Why do you need to be the one who knew it ahead of time? You can do it for fun, like, oh, I'm going to try to predict what's going to happen and test my predictive capacity. Okay, so if I predict something and then it comes to pass, then I must have some pretty good predictive capacity and I seem to understand what's going on, or maybe I'm lucky and add some more data to the working operation here and keep refining the theory as you go forward. But this whole like melodramatically posting, now that Trump has done this and this and this and this are going to happen. Okay. Are you like, do you want someone to say you're smart? You want some cookies? Are you like, this is just entertainment. And it's fine. It's cool. Yeah, go fire off your takes. But recognize that all you're doing is satiating your own emotional, like, your heart rate is elevated and you need an outlet. So you're just kind of spewing emotions out there. You're engaged in some sort of performative entertainment process to satisfy your own self and your desire for an audience. And maybe looking for like-minded people or something like that. But you're not some sort of like serious analyst or anything. It's so extremely feminine, these like melodramatic pronouncements. These people are wholly ill-equipped for the type of political system they claim to want. You want no voting? You want property owners only vote? Or less? You want a king? You want an emperor? You want some sort of powerful autocrat? Yeah, when you get that guy, he gets into power, and then you just trust him to do what he's going to do. Now, what's funny is that this is I had second thoughts about whether or not I even wanted to get into all of this today, because this is very much just an online phenomenon. I've lost track of whether it's in the King Pill Discord or just on the timeline or in group chats. I've lost track of the number of people who've been like, yeah, I was out around doing stuff on Saturday afternoon and I was at the store, I was out, at some party or a park or whatever, and nobody cared. Nobody's paying attention to it. They're just kind of like, oh yeah, there's like some war thing happening or something like that. See, this is the other thing, is that America has become so inured to this, that this radical, neurotic, like a cat constantly dancing around on top of a stovetop, like that persona is an extremely niche online persona. Very, very few people, and in absolute numbers, actually think or care about any of these kinds of things. Which I think is probably part of what drives the hysterical need to constantly fire off these takes. I have to be the first one to say I'm very unhappy about this, because they're trying to whip up that sentiment. They're concerned that more people aren't panicking like they are. So we need to whip up more sentiment, get more people really upset. Make more people lose faith in Trump. That's what they're actually trying to do. That's the only possible upshot to this like gay posting. You can think what you want about it, but at the end of the day, once the decision's made, you back the decision. You don't root for your country to lose. You don't root for the guy who took a bullet for you to be humiliated and disgraced. Even if you think he deserves it, you don't root for that. That's not how a man behaves toward his betters. Once the decision's been made, you back the decision. You back the men who are actually involved in it. And there has to be a baseline of recognition that there is this information asymmetry that I'm never going to, I'm not going to be on the inside on this information asymmetry. I have to recognize that there reaches a point where I have to defer. They know more than I do. They've got more facts on the ground than I do. And I've got to trust that they're going to make the best decisions possible with the information that they have at their disposal. But the idea that you're going to the idea that this sort of military operation with the amount of complexity and everything that's involved in it is just purely being done because, oh shit, Israel's going to do something. Fuck, we got to make sure we protect ourselves. I guess we'll just jump in as well. This is the only way that you come to that sort of conclusion is if you've spent your entire life like playing video games and you've never actually had a career or been around any serious people or been inside any sort of major institution or anything like that. This sort of military operation cannot help but be undertaken by very, very serious people, by definition. You don't spin something up like this on a whim because, oh shit, we're getting backed into doing it. More on that here in a minute. I gotta get going in here. I'm ranting too much. So, old Tory right-wing nutters, very good poster, says the reflexive anti-war movement is driven by perennially cynical Gen Xers, prone to conspiracy theorizing, and millennials with Iraq war PTSD. All these polls show younger Americans are the second most likely to support the war after seniors who all remember 1979. Look at this poll. Do you approve or disapprove of the U.S. killing Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in a joint attack with Israel? 40% approve, 31% disapprove, 28% are not sure. And that 28% might be the most notable thing in all of this. Like, obviously, 40% of people are going to approve about hearing the United States knock off this leader, this foreign leader who they've heard about forever. If you don't realize that the majority of Americans are going to at least passively approve of that, you don't know your own countrymen. Of course they're going to at least be like, yeah, sure, cool. They probably had a reason for it. That stuff's outside my ken. I don't really pay attention. That's the posture of the overwhelming majority of the country. And there's going to be some who are like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. I'm open to hearing the upside or the downside. I don't know. Then when you break it down, GOP plus 59, Democrat minus 32.
To the Gulag. If you survive, you earn your freedom.
Bobby Ballbags gifted a subscription. Congrats, first citizen. Good to see you in here, buddy. You have been gifted a sub. You can now use the channel emotes. Look at this. Endies. Independents. Basically break even. They're kind of like, let me see what's going to happen. Of course, Democrats are totally opposed to it. GOP, like, seriously, overwhelmingly approves. This goes to all the people. It's like people can't say, I don't like this. This makes me uncomfortable. So they have to come up with some sort of justification. And so then it's like the one that seems as if it's going to be the most ironclad is, oh, this is going to cost them the midterm. Oh, the midterms are going to lose because of this. And so people will say that because this is the way that I can express how distressed I am by this while seeming like I'm just like putting on my serious hat and doing my political analysis thing. Oh, how could he be so stupid? Doesn't he know? Doesn't he know he really needs to win in the midterms and this is going to cost him the midterms? It's not going to cost him the midterms. Because the majority of the American people don't care. They're like, yeah, whatever. Look at this. Age 18 to 29 plus 10. Age 45 to 64 plus 5. Age 65 plus 20. Because again, the age 65 plusers, they remember when this current Iranian regime held a bunch of Americans hostage. It's the ages 30 to 44 who are at -8. My poor generation, man. The millennials. The most raped. Whites are plus 28. Hispanics are plus 9. Men are plus 15. Women are plus 4. Blacks are minus 28. So who's the real niggers now? So the sampling of the United States who disapproves is Democrat or independent millennial blacks. Democrat millennial blacks. That's the subset of the population that most disapproves of this. Yeah, totally checks out. Okay, so I listened to these two conversations here from Tommy's podcast, which I just love. The dude's he's got the gig, man. He just gets these awesome guests and just sits there and just chills out while they talk. And he jumps in every once in a while. Then he just sits there, just talks, or just listens while everyone talks. Then he fires the episode off and records another one. This episode, and I'm going to say, actually, I'm going to put it like this. The links will be on the Substack for this episode later, so it'll be in the podcast description as well. Listen to them in this order. So the first one was MI6 Brown Campus, which that's a joke from the episode. I'll let you guys listen to it to understand what MI6 Brown is. This was Steve Murray and Ian Burlingame. And then later that day, he did Reset the Commonwealth with Colonel Towners, Tom Luongo, and Ian Burlingame again. Episode number 1984. Isn't that interesting? Listen to them in this order, and I really strongly recommend you go listen to these. I'm cautious about Ian Burlingame. I like a lot of what he says. I don't kind of like on some stuff, and he's a spook. Like, he's obviously a spook. Whether he's a spook operating on his own terms or a spook operating with other people, whatever. Like, he's a spook. Like, he has the profile of a spook. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean he's I think this is another one of these sort of what's become, it used to be like based, but now it's totally normie to be like, oh, that person's associated with intelligence. That means they're bad and they're working against us. They're part of the regime. This is obviously not the case. Obviously, we have our own spooks as well. So, yeah, he was intelligence of the Green Berets. He's very upfront about it. Right, exactly, almost nomad. So I think, I'm not saying that the man is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but I think that his perspective is very compelling. And the way that he laid it out in those episodes is, it really got the old noggin jogging. He framed this up as, it seems like a world war, but it's not. It's actually a continuation of the English Civil War. This is a civil war happening within the English-speaking peoples. You have and because the British Empire was so expansive and covered so much of the world, that now, if you have a civil war within the English-speaking world, it's going to necessarily seem like a civil war, like a world war. But it's not proper to think of it as a world war, because this is the distinct terms of the conflict are pursuant to the English identity, the Anglo world identity, and the goals and trajectory. And then here's another thing. This is one of the reasons why I've found the Tom Luongo, Ian Burlingame, Alex Craner, Joaquin Flores, Tommy's podcast guests, the crypto rich or Rich Does Politics guests, that world, I think, has had the best analysis. Promethean Action, we're going to watch a Promethean Action video after I read this thing from Ian Burlingame. I think they have the best takes on all of this. They seem to have the clearest view of what's going on, and it's because they're taking a wholesome view of all the different events and all the different characters that are involved in all of these events, and recognizing that these are not, like, just because it shows up as a different article on the internet doesn't mean that it's a disconnected, it needs to be seen as things happening completely in a vacuum with respect to one another. The whole world doesn't resolve back to Israel. There's a lot of shit that's going on right now, and there are a lot of major players making major moves that are either wholly detached from Israel or the problem of the Jews, or are adjacent to it. Jews aren't the only people with agency in the world. There's plenty of non-Jews who have a lot of agency. They have a lot of wealth, a lot of power. They like to put that wealth and power to work towards their own ends. It's weird to me to be like believe in the greatness of the white man, and also Jews are the only people who ever have agency. And everything that's ever done is always done just for the purpose of the Jews. It's just, I don't understand how someone gets themselves into that position. That's true. Saying only Jews have agency means I can sit on my couch doing nothing. Yeah, there you go. Zoomer Dylan, whites actually have agency, and it turns out the entire world revolves around white people. The world doesn't revolve around Jews, it revolves around white people. And the current intra-white people conflict, every one of these major wars is about white people going to war against other white people to decide about what the white people's world is going to look like. And then occasionally, or often even, they bring in other non-white people and use them as assets in their war against other white people. There's an agency for whites. Yeah. I missed that. There was a tweet that came, or a message that came in on X, but it jumped off the screen before I could see it. Something about Craner. I didn't get it. Whoever that was, if you want to send that again, I'm going to see if I can see it. So this Iran thing is not happening in a vacuum, just simply with respect to Israel. There's everything else that's been going on with the different Gulf states, Trump's relationship to the Gulf states. Then there's Venezuela. There's Mexico, this El Mencho guy. There's China. There's Russia and the Ukraine. There's Europe and the hostilities, the veiled hostilities going back and forth between the United States and Europe. These are all different variables that are at play in all of this. And for the last year and a half since Trump was reelected, there has been a very consistent trajectory happening here. And that trajectory is an increasing divide between two halves of what was the British Empire, what was once the territories of the British Empire. In the same way that the Roman Empire eventually fractured into Eastern and Western parts, Ian Burlingame's thesis here is that the same thing is happening to the British Empire. And what we're seeing now is Eastern, you could call it like Eastern New Rome and Western New Rome, or Eastern Britannia, Western Britannia, whatever you wanted to call it. There's two warring capitals now who are clearly at war with one another. And those capitals are London and DC. They're increasingly factionalizing away from each other. And all these little conflicts that are popping up all over the place are various proxy conflicts of this continuation of the English Civil War, because once again, the world revolves around white people. So here is this is a long one, but I think it's very, very worthwhile, because once I started taking on this understanding of events as they're playing out, I don't get caught off guard by stuff nearly as often, and everything just kind of makes sense more. So this is a working thesis, but I think there's a lot to it. Byzantium 2.0, the 400-year English Civil War deciding the fate of the English-speaking peoples. This is from Ian Burlingame, published a couple days ago. All we see the world over is the third great English Civil War. The entire world finds itself inexorably ensnared in English Civil War 3.0, a protracted intra-elite struggle among English-speaking elites over the locus of authority, the legitimacy of wealth, licit production versus illicit extraction, and the very soul of our civilization. Precisely because the British Empire's global dominion, extended and amplified through the American post-World War II order as its ultimate manifestation, permeates every corner of human affairs via the 7 pillars of national power. So here's the 7 pillars of national power. He's going to come back to these at various points throughout this. Diplomatic alliances that bind nations in webs of obligation, informational narratives shaping global perceptions through media empires, military projections enforcing hegemony from distant bases, economic structures dictating trade and development, financial mechanisms wielding debt as a weapon of control, intelligence networks infiltrating adversaries and allies alike, and law enforcement apparatuses extending extraterritorial reach to suppress dissent. This omnipresent apparatus, born from the 1688 capture of the English crown by continental financialists and replicated across oceans, now transforms proxy conflicts in Ukraine, trade wars with China, and economic upheavals worldwide into mere theaters of an internal schism, where non-state Praetorian banks and investment behemoths outmuscle sovereigns, compelling billions, wittingly or not, to fund and fight in a final civil war that could either liberate English civilization from 4 centuries of parasitic rule or consign it, and the globe it envelops, to irreversible decay or even utter destruction. That whole paragraph was one sentence. Epic sentence crafting here to get that grammatically correct. Now, to our Jew-obsessed brethren, you might see non-state Praetorian banks and investment behemoths who outmuscle sovereigns and compel billions, wittingly or not, to fund and fight a final civil war, blah, 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 blah. Oh, there's the Jews! There's the Jews! And yes, yeah, there are definitely lots and lots of Jews involved in all of that. There are also lots and lots of Jews who aren't involved in all of that. And I take it as a direct insult to white people writ large that only Jews are capable of malevolently using banking and investment schemes to wield political power. It's also just historically, completely, utterly ignorant, ironically enough. Introduction: the spectacle and the substance. The world's attention is fixated on the surface-level drama of a new Cold War or even a Third World War. Commentators speak breathlessly of the US-China rivalry, the war in Ukraine, the rise of BRICS, the fragmentation of the post-1945 liberal order. These are presented by mainstream analysis as a clash of nations, a conventional great power competition reminiscent of the 20th century's darkest chapters. But this interpretation mistakes symptoms for causes, effects for essence. What's that? An essence energy distinction? In an article arguing that America is New Byzantium? Ian Burlingame, sir. I was not familiar with your game. This article argues that these geopolitical conflicts are not the primary event, but the visible symptoms of a deeper, centuries-long struggle. English Civil War 3.0. This is an intra-civilizational war among the English-speaking elites over the fundamental source and locus of power. Its roots lie in the capture of the English crown by continental financial interests in 1688, an event that created a persistent ruling class whose power now challenges the sovereignty of the nation-states they inhabit. The current global instability represents the final phase of this struggle, a contest for the soul of English civilization itself. To understand our present moment, we must first understand how a bloodless revolution on a small island nearly 4 centuries ago planted the institutional DNA that now governs the financial life of billions. We must trace how that DNA was replicated across oceans and empires, and how it now faces its ultimate challenge. The stakes could not be higher. Whether Washington, D.C. can become a new Constantinople, preserving the core of English civilization while casting off corrupting influences, or whether it, like the old Rome, will be consumed by the internal rot of Praetorian rule. Part 2. Defining the battlefield. Actors, concepts, and stakes. A. The financialist defined. Not a conspiracy, but a type. Any argument that posits elite continuity across centuries must immediately confront the charge of conspiratorial thinking. The accusation is predictable that this framework reduces complex history to a puppet show with shadowy figures pulling strings from a secret room in Geneva or London. This article rejects that caricature. What I'm describing isn't a conspiracy, but a type. A grouping of like-minded humans sharing material interests, institutional homes, educational backgrounds, and a coherent worldview that transcends national borders. This is a thing I've referred to, trying to capture this. He calls it a type, and I think that's good. I think that works. I've tried to capture this before as describing it as almost like a transnational ethnicity. Because these people have spent so much time embedded in and around their own people in these institutions, globalist institutions across the world, that they've almost developed their own ethnos. They're intermarried. Their physical proximity geographically they're dispersed across the world, but every place where they are is built in the same way. They have like the same tastes, the same cultures, the same aesthetics that they try to mimic. All these bureaucratic institutions and structures, and they live in these walled gardens and these gated communities. They may actually take up residence in this country or that country or the other country, but the specific region where they take up residence is made to look as similar as possible across all these different domains. As the Max Planck Studies on Financialization document, finance, as the Max Planck Studies on Financialization document, as the Max Planck Studies on Financializations document, finance, quote, inserts itself into relationships of class and kinship, and fundamentally, quote, reconfigures legal and ecological dimensions of social organization. This isn't the work of a secret committee, but the organic expression of a parasitic class whose power derives from a specific relationship to wealth creation. Hold on, where's this message? I can see it on my screen. Why is it not showing up in the chat? Oh, here we go. Lord Breezy, Protestant Reformation to English Civil War to French Revolution to Marxism to Israeli settlement to rule by banks to designated enemies to Iran. Americans. Okay. The financialist type can be defined with precision. Its members derive power and profit not from production, innovation, or trade, what we should call licit wealth creation, but from financial engineering, the manipulation of debt, control of currency issuance, and the extraction of rent from the productive economy. This constitutes illicit wealth in the sense that it captures value created by others rather than generating new value. The instruments of financialist power are the great institutions of global finance. Banks and central banks operating with various degrees of independence from political control, massive investment firms that manage assets exceeding the GDP of most nations, and the interlocking directorates that create a unified worldview and set of policy preferences regardless of national borders. When BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets, a sum greater than the economies of all but 3 nations, it exercises power that's not merely economic, but fundamentally political. When the chair of the Federal Reserve can move markets with a single sentence, that's power without societal mandate. When Treasury secretaries and central bankers move seamlessly between government service and employment by the very institutions they once regulated, that's not conspiracy, it's type cohesion. B. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, the Genesis event. To understand how this type achieved its enduring grip on the English-speaking world, we must examine the pivotal moment of November 1688, when William of Orange, the Dutch stadtholder, landed at Torbay with an invading force funded by continental merchants. This wasn't merely a dynastic squabble or a religious realignment. It was, in the most literal sense, a hostile takeover of the English state. The first hostile corporate takeover by the VOC of the BEIC, a la the mindset of Gordon Gekko. Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Prior to 1688, the English monarchy had been persistently insolvent. King Charles II had been forced to declare a stop on the exchequer in 1672, suspending repayment of his debts. His father, Charles I, had resorted to forced loans when voluntary credit dried up. The fundamental problem was structural. Without parliamentary consent for taxation, the Crown lacked the credible commitment to repay its obligations, and lenders therefore refused to advance funds. In reflecting on the fiscal architecture of English monarchy from Elizabeth I to James II, one discerns a deliberate orchestration by merchants, bankers, parliamentarians, bureaucrats, and select nobles to externalize the realm's essential expenditures, defense, security, and administration, onto the sovereign. This created a gilded cage of indebtedness, where monarchs were compelled to accrue unpayable loans, their authority eroded by dependency on these very elites who profited from the arrangement. Elizabeth's reign exemplified this, as costs for armadas and explorations burdened royal coffers, while commercial gains flowed to private interests, forcing reliance on conditional parliamentary subsidies and high-interest city loans. The Stuarts inherited and amplified this vulnerability. James I and Charles I faced escalating military demands without fiscal autonomy, leading to contentious measures like ship money, portrayed as tyranny but rooted in systemic entrapment. Under Charles II and James II, the pattern persisted amid restoration wars and colonial ambitions, with Dutch and English financiers extending credit that siphoned resources through interest, perpetuating corruption unchecked by a weakened crown. James II's bids for efficiency and toleration were thwarted by this fiscal straitjacket, his opponents framing reforms as absolutism while safeguarding their advantages. This dynamic not only impoverished the monarchy, but also stifled its role as guardian of the populace against elite excesses, fostering instability that culminated in the events of 1688. The Inglorious Revolution, far from a mere vindication of liberty, formalized this shift by embedding parliamentary, specifically Whig-dominated, control over finances, as North and Weingast elucidated in resolving the credible commitment problem for creditors. Parliament's annual sessions, audits, and purse string dominance, per the 1689 Declaration of Rights, empowered the manufacturing and trading sectors that funded William's invasion, derailing James's absolutism, as Pincus and Robinson describe. Yet this was no popular empowerment. It entrenched a financial order favoring those elites, birthing institutions like the Bank of England to manage debt in their interest, thus redirecting and permanently instantiating rather than dismantling the inequities forced upon the monarchs that had long plagued the realm. The creation of the Bank of England in 1694 was the institutional embodiment of this new dispensation. As one historian noted, the history of the Bank of England during its first few years is in no slight degree the history of the settlement of 1689, end quote. The bank was established as a private corporation that would manage the public debt, lending money to the government in exchange for the privilege of issuing banknotes and controlling the nation's currency. This was the original sin. The creation of a permanent national debt managed by private interests, which would fund the state's perpetual wars while simultaneously enriching the financial class that held the debt, most all Praetorian Rome connected, if not outright Praetorian Rome. The political economy of the Revolution was itself contested. King James II had been deeply rooted in the Royal African and East India Companies, believing that, quote, only land could produce wealth, and that England's future lay in overseas territorial empire. The Whigs who displaced him rejected this model. They argued that labor created wealth, and that government should actively support economic development, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Their creation of the Bank of England was intended to, quote, promote the development of the manufacturing sector by making credit more available. But the institutional mechanism they created, a private central bank managing public debt, contained within it the seeds of a new form of power that would eventually transcend and subsume the manufacturing interests it was meant to serve. C. The institutional DNA. How 1688 created a self-perpetuating system. The significance of 1688 lies not in any single event, but in the creation of an institutional template that would prove remarkably durable and portable, as well as outright slaver in nature, if not label. This template contained several key elements. Element 1, the centralization of public debt through a private institution. The Bank of England model created a self-reinforcing cycle. The state required ever more debt to fund its ambitions, primarily wars. The financial class held that debt and collected interest on it. The state's need for future borrowing made it dependent on the continued goodwill of the financial class. And the financial class, in turn, had a vested interest in the state's ability to tax the productive economy to service the debt. And so the financial class, financialists, kept the realm in a perpetual state of conflict and war. And you could see this here, that if this financial class is holding that debt and collecting interest on it, the state is going to have an ever-expanding, a perpetual need for ever-expanding territory. It's going to be forced to become a globalizing force, because it's going to have to take in more and more and more collateral to continue generating more and more production against that debt to continue to maintain the paying the interest on it and servicing that debt. Element 2, the fusion of state power and financial interests through interlocking elites. The same families and interests that controlled the Bank of England also sat in Parliament, advised, controlled, and maybe that's supposed to be advised/controlled the crown, and dominated the great trading companies. This wasn't corruption in the modern sense, it was the normal operation of a system in which public and private power were seamlessly integrated. That is, until it became nothing but corruption beginning around the time of World War I. Element 3, the exportability of the model. The institutional architecture created in London after 1688, a central bank managing public debt, a permanent national debt, a financial class whose interests were aligned with state expansion, could be replicated in other English-speaking polities. And it was, most significantly in the American colonies that would eventually rebel against London's control while simultaneously adopting many of its financial innovations. So those were the three elements of the template of this institutional template created in 1688. So the institutional template created in 1688 that was outright slaver in nature, if not label, it contained these elements: the centralization of public debt through a private institution, the fusion of state power and financial interest through interlocking elites, and the exportability of the model. Part 3, the Long War. Key handoff moments and fractures. English Civil War 2.0, the American Revolution, a schism in the elite. The American Revolution has traditionally been understood as a colonial rebellion against imperial overreach, a fight over taxation without representation, waged by liberty-loving colonists against a distant and oppressive parliament. This interpretation isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. What if we view the revolution instead as a schism within the English-speaking elite? The colonists who led the rebellion weren't the dispossessed or the marginalized, they were the colonial elite. Landed gentry, emerging industrialists, merchants whose commercial ambitions were constrained by London's mercantilist system. Their quarrel wasn't with English civilization or English institutions, but with the specific configuration of power that had emerged from the 1688 settlement. The Navigation Acts, the restrictions on colonial manufacturing, the requirement that all trade pass through British ports, these were not arbitrary impositions. They were the logical expression of a financialized imperial system designed to extract value from the periphery for the benefit of the metropolitan center. The colonial elite, producing real wealth from land, labor, and enterprise, found themselves perpetually subordinate to a London-based financial class whose power rested on debt and manipulation rather than production. The Declaration of Independence is, read in this light, a revolutionary document, not just in its repudiation of monarchy, but in its implicit rejection of the financialist model. Its indictment of the king for imposing taxes on us without our consent was also an indictment of a parliament that had, since 1688, claimed the exclusive right to tax precisely because it was the institution where financial interests were represented. When the colonists spoke of consent, they meant something different from the Whig oligarchs of London. They meant the consent of the governed, not the consent of bondholders. Yet the American Republic, even as it threw off political control, immediately faced the same fundamental question that had haunted England. What kind of financial system would it have? The fierce battles between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson in the 1790s weren't mere policy disputes. Hamilton's program, a national bank, assumption of state debts, federal encouragement of commerce and manufacturing, was an explicit attempt to replicate the Bank of England model on American soil. Jefferson's opposition, his vision of an agrarian republic of independent yeomen, was a rejection of that entire trajectory. The fact that Hamilton largely won, that the first and second banks of the United States were chartered, that the United States eventually established its own central bank and its own permanent national debt, demonstrates that the capture of 1688 wasn't merely a British phenomenon, but an English-speaking one. The institutional DNA had crossed the Atlantic. No one had broken free of anything but the illusionary power of the crown. Now, this is where part of it, I think his trajectory is correct with a lot of what he's laying out here. I would quibble with the take, because I think Hamilton's program was actually a modified repudiation of the Bank of England model. And Thomas Jefferson's model basically is what the persistence of Thomas Jefferson's model is what permitted Hamilton's program to be restored back into the Bank of England model. But we continue. The crucible of the 19th century, industrialists versus rentiers. The 19th century witnessed the full flowering of the Industrial Revolution, and with it, a new tension within the English-speaking elite. The struggle between industrial capitalists, who created wealth through production, and financial capitalists, who extracted wealth through finance. This tension played out differently in Britain and America, but it was present in both. In Britain, the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846 represented a victory for industrial capital over landed interests. But it was also a victory for the financial class, which had long sought to lower food prices to keep wages down and maintain Britain's competitive advantage in manufacturing. The mid-Victorian boom was a golden age for both industry and finance, but the underlying tensions remained. By the late 19th century, British capital was flowing overseas in enormous quantities to build railroads in Argentina, mines in South Africa, plantations in India, while domestic industry began to stagnate. The financial class profited handsomely from this global portfolio. The industrial working class paid the price in unemployment and declining living standards. In America, the Civil War itself can be viewed through this lens. The conflict between the industrial North and the agrarian South was many things. A moral struggle over slavery, a constitutional crisis over union, but it was also a struggle between two different models of political economy. The North, with its factories, its banks, its railroads, represented the future that Hamilton had envisioned. The South, with its plantation agriculture dependent on slave labor and export markets, represented an older form of wealth extraction. The North's victory ensured that the American future would be industrial and capitalist, but it also cemented the power of the financial houses that had financed the war. Jay Cook's sale of government bonds to ordinary citizens created a new class of investors with a stake in the federal debt. The National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864 created a uniform national currency and a system of nationally chartered banks. The institutional architecture of financialist power was being built even as the nation celebrated its triumph over slavery and disunion. Replacing the slavery of chains with the slavery of ever-increasing taxes and debt never fully payable with real wage stagnation and decline. The Great Relocation, Bretton Woods and the Transfer of the Center, 1944. The Second World War devastated Europe and left Britain prostrate. The United States emerged as the undisputed hegemon of the capitalist world. But this wasn't merely a transfer of military and political power, it was a relocation of the center of English-speaking, now utterly financialized world. The Bretton Woods Conference of July 1944 is conventionally understood as a moment of enlightened international cooperation. 44 nations coming together to design a new global financial architecture that would prevent the competitive devaluations and trade wars of the 1930s. This interpretation contains truth, but it conceals as much as it reveals. As Ben Stile of the Council on Foreign Relations has documented, the primary American architects of Bretton Woods, Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau and his deputy Harry Dexter White, had two aims. The first was public and laudable, to establish a new international monetary framework with a privileged place for the US dollar overseen by a new international monetary fund. The second was never stated publicly, but was at least as important. Quote, to use American financial leverage over bankrupt Britain to pull down the economic foundations of its global empire. This included the special status of the pound sterling in the system of imperial trade preference that gave Britain privileged access to the markets of its colonies and dominions. Treasury believed this would, quote, permanently eliminate Britain as a geopolitical and economic rival. The Americans succeeded brilliantly. Britain emerged from the war with enormous debts and a shattered economy. The Lend-Lease Agreement was abruptly terminated in 1945, and Britain was forced to negotiate a massive loan from the United States on American terms. The pound sterling was gradually dethroned as a reserve currency. The dollar became the world's money, backed by gold at $35 per ounce, with all other currencies fixed to the dollar. Yet this transfer of power from London to Washington was not a liberation from financialist control. It was a relocation of the center of that control. The institutions created at Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, and later the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, were designed to manage a global economy on terms favorable to American capital. But the same interlocking elites that had dominated London's financial world now found new homes in Washington and New York. The CFR, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, these were the new nodes of transatlantic elite coordination. The hardware changed, but the software remained the same, as did the City of London itself. The continuity is personified by figures like the Rockefeller family, whose fortune was made in oil, but whose power extended through banking, Chase Manhattan, philanthropy, the Rockefeller Foundation, and foreign policy, Nelson Rockefeller's various government positions. Or the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State, Allen Dulles as Director of Central Intelligence, both partners at Sullivan and Cromwell, one of Wall Street's most powerful law firms. The financialist class had simply relocated its headquarters. While the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 appeared to orchestrate a grand transfer of global financial dominion from the storied City of London to the burgeoning might of Wall Street, enshrining the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and spawning institutions like the IMF and World Bank to ostensibly democratize economic stability, a deeper scrutiny unveils the masterful sleight of hand perpetuated by figures such as the Dulles brothers, whose Wall Street pedigrees at Sullivan and Cromwell intertwined with the birth of the American national security state. John Foster Dulles as an architect of post-war diplomacy, and Allen Dulles, pivotal in transitioning the OSS to the CIA in 1947, concurrently facilitated the chartering of the National Science Foundation in 1950 and the bolstering of the National Institute of Health, framing these as pillars of progress while embedding mechanisms for a self-funding global paramilitary apparatus. This shadowy consortium, sustained through covert black budgets, illicit trades, and coerced international tributes, has compelled nations to underwrite perpetual wars, engineered conflicts, and the expropriation of trillions in wealth, all while maintaining operational coordination from the enduring financial nerve center of the City of London, where transnational elites ensure that apparent shifts in power merely mask an unbroken chain of imperial control to the present era. Anticipating to counter... Part 3. The argument refined, complexity, not conspiracy. Anticipating the counter-argument. At this point, the skeptical reader will object. This is a reductionist conspiracy theory. It ignores the immense complexity of history, the contingency of events, the role of ideas and individuals in shaping outcomes. It posits a centuries-old plot by shadowy figures who never appear on the historical record. It is, in short, bad history. This objection deserves a serious response. If this article were arguing that a secret committee of Venetian bankers met in 1688 and planned the entire subsequent course of English-speaking history, it would indeed be nonsense. But that isn't the argument. That's not how a type works. They don't have to. They are of a type, and therefore think and act in predictable, always self-serving ways to any and all events and occurrences. This is the sense in which I think there's utility in thinking of this type as itself being something akin to like a race or an ethnicity, and that it's a bunch of people who have who share a collective mind that persists through generations, to the point where I'm sure you could delineate you'd have to be able to compare it to a counterfactual, so it might not be possible, but you could like delineate an epigenetic evolution of this particular type, irrespective of their actual physical locations. The rebuttal. a convergence of class interests. What I'm describing isn't a conspiracy, but a convergence of interests. Individuals educated at the same institutions, Oxford and Cambridge, Harvard and Yale, the London School of Economics, moving through the same social and professional circles, Davos, Bilderberg, the Council on Foreign Relations, and sharing the same material stake in a debt-based financialized system, will naturally pursue policies that protect and expand that system. This is class consciousness, not conspiracy. The economic historian might object that the concept of class is too blunt an instrument, that it obscures as much as it reveals. But the Max Planck studies on financialization demonstrate that scholars can and do analyze financialization as a structural phenomenon without descending into conspiratorial thinking. They examine, quote, the ways in which finance inserts itself into relationships of class and kinship, how it, quote, reconfigures legal and ecological dimensions of social organization. This is serious scholarship, not speculative fantasy. Consider the response to the 2008 financial crisis. When the global financial system teetered on the brink of collapse, policymakers in the US and Europe responded with a series of extraordinary measures. Bailouts of major banks, near zero interest rates, massive purchases of government and corporate debt by central banks. These policies were described by their proponents as pragmatic responses to an unprecedented emergency. But they also had the effect, foreseeable and foreseen, of protecting the interests of the financialist class. Bondholders were made whole, shareholders in major banks were largely protected, the socialized losses of the financial sector were paid for by the public, while the privatized gains of the boom years remained in private hands. Was this the result of a conspiracy? No, it was the result of a type with a shared worldview, occupying key positions in Treasury departments, central banks, and financial regulatory agencies. A Treasury Secretary who spent his career on Wall Street, a central banker who spent his life in the fraternity of central bankers, a regulator who expects to return to the industry he regulates, these individuals don't need to conspire. They share assumptions so deeply embedded that they appear not as ideology but as common sense. All it requires is bad actors conducting fraud and corruption beyond a scale. Such failure crashes the entire system, all masked long enough for this very thing to be brought to such a point. Then the financialists go into action, acting naturally to their type. As Adam Smith described an invisible hand guiding market outcomes, there's an invisible hand of type interest guiding policy outcomes. A chancellor, a treasury secretary, and a central banker from this milieu will all independently arrive at the same pragmatic solution to a crisis. A bailout, an austerity measure, a trade deal, because their shared worldview defines those actions as both necessary and natural. The capture of 1688 created the institutional DNA, and that DNA has been replicating itself ever since. I think this is one of the best descriptions of globalism as a type like this that I've ever heard. This is what globalism is, like the institutional DNA of the financialist type, which was the imperial policy of the British Empire. It was what became the demonstrated purpose of the British Empire was to globally expand the reach of the financialist type. So it's selected for people who thought and acted like and fraternized with financialists. It's selected for them, put them into positions of power, and then once they were in those positions of power, they acted according to their type. Why this matters for understanding the present. This framework matters because it offers a more accurate diagnosis of our present discontents than the conventional great power competition narrative. If the conflict in Ukraine is simply a clash between NATO and Russia, then the solution is more NATO, more sanctions, more military aid to Kiev. If the US-China rivalry is simply a new Cold War, then the solution is containment, confrontation, and preparation for eventual conflict. But if these conflicts are symptoms of a deeper intra-elite war within the broader English-speaking civilization, then the prescriptions change. The question becomes not how to defeat Russia or contain China, but how to resolve the internal contradictions that have made the English-speaking world vulnerable to external challenges. The enemy, if that word can be used, isn't in Moscow or Beijing, it's in London, New York, and Washington. Or rather, in a type within the three elite classes that operates across all these cities with little regard for national loyalty. This isn't to absolve Russia or China of responsibility for their actions. The former's aggression in Ukraine is real, the latter's successful capitalism presents genuine challenges. But the weakness that these powers exploit is internal to the English-speaking world. A civilization that has hollowed out its industrial base, addicted itself to debt, and allowed a financial type to capture its political institutions is a civilization ripe for challenge from without, and far more so from within. Part 4. Byzantium 2.0. The analogy perfected. The parallels drawn. The Roman Empire's 3rd century crisis, a period of 50 years during which more than 20 emperors were assassinated, the economy collapsed, and the frontiers were breached by barbarian invaders, offers a powerful analogy for our own time. Then, as now, elite rivalry and financial debasement threatened to destroy a civilization that had dominated the known world for centuries. Diocletian's response to this crisis was the Tetrarchy, a division of the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by a senior emperor, Augustus, and a junior successor, Caesar. This system stabilized the empire for a time, but it also acknowledged a fundamental reality. The center could no longer hold. The Western Empire, with its capital at Rome, continued to decay under the pressure of barbarian invasions, elite corruption, and economic decline. It finally collapsed in 476 AD, when the last Western emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain. But the Eastern Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, endured for another 1,000 years. Its capital, Constantinople, founded by Constantine the Great in 330 AD, became the center of a civilization that preserved Roman law, Greek learning, and Christian orthodoxy, long after Rome itself had fallen to barbarians. The Byzantine emperors faced challenges that would have destroyed any other state. Persian invasions, Arab conquests, Bulgarian wars, Crusader treachery, yet they adapted, compromised, and survived. As one scholar notes, the Byzantine Empire, quote, does not fit easily into a Western narrative and is seen as outside the development of the Western state and international state system, end quote. But this very marginality, this position between East and West, this refusal to be assimilated into a simple story of Western progress, makes Byzantium a powerful metaphor for the English-speaking world's current predicament. For we too, as the English-speaking peoples, the English civilization, have refused to assimilate, to remain on the outside of First and Second Rome, to value sovereignty over conformity. To trace this evolution across eras. Pre-1688 era, the dominant center was the crown and parliament. Key influences was the monarchical absolutism and religious strife. Freedom level was limited by royal prerogative and divine right. Roman parallel would be the pre-crisis Rome, Senate clashing with emperors like Nero. Then the 1688 to 1945 era, the dominant center is London. Key influences, continental banking via Dutch loans and financialists. Freedom level is captured, empire financed through perpetual debt. The Roman parallel would be the divided empire, 293 to 395 AD, tetrarchy with east-west co-emperors under Diocletian. The post-1945 era, the dominant center is Washington. The key influences, U.S. hegemony via Bretton Woods and global institutions. The freedom level, partially free, persistent elite entanglements. The Roman parallel would be Constantinople's rise, 330 to 476 AD, Eastern survival amid Western barbarian sacks. I hate those barbarian sacks. I only like my own sack. Slutty Mook says, what's even better is we have inherited elements of Roman and Byzantine civilization and get to be Byzantium. You know, it's fascinating. I can't remember where I was talking about this just recently, but I said that there's a certain sense in which actually this is in a King Pill Discord voice chat, I think, that there's a certain sense in which the emergence of Trump and this resurgence of American national consciousness has an Eastern vibe to it, to me. There's sort of like this earthy spiritual connection to reality that Trump has that has kind of an Eastern vibe to it. But I'm kind of sloppily trying to put these things into words, but it's funny to me I was thinking and talking about that a couple of months ago, and then here we go. Here's Neo-Byzantium. Now the contemporary era. The dominant center is contested. The key influences are America, Russia, and China, constructive rivalries, and populist awakenings. The freedom level is potential for full independence from Praetorian control. The Roman parallel would be the Byzantine peak, 476 to 1453 AD, enduring Roman legacy against Persian, Arab, and Ottoman threats. Refining the metaphor, who are the new barbarians? The conventional use of the Roman analogy identifies the barbarians as external powers, cartels, foreign invaders, Islamicist terrorism. These are the forces pressing against and within the gates of English civilization, threatening to overwhelm it as the Goths and Vandals overwhelmed Rome. This article proposes a different interpretation. The real barbarians are within. The external threats are real enough, but they aren't the primary danger. They are powers exploiting the West's internal decay, much as the Sassanid Persians and later the Arabs exploited Roman-Persian exhaustion in the 7th century. The 4th century rivalry between Byzantium and Sassanid Persia created a buffer zone that remained stable for long periods, but when the two great powers exhausted each other in final wars of annihilation, the resulting power vacuum allowed the rise of Islam, one of the most significant events of Middle Eastern and global history. The contemporary parallel is striking. The United States and its allies have spent 2 decades fighting wars in the Middle East and Central Asia, expending trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. China has watched and learned and built. Now it stands as the great creditor nation, holding trillions in dollar reserves, extending its influence through the Belt and Road Initiative, competing with the American-led order not through direct confrontation, but through economic penetration and diplomatic persuasion. But the real barbarians aren't in Beijing, nor in Moscow, nor even in Mexico or the Muslim world. They're in the financial districts of New York and London, in the boardrooms where decisions are made to offshore jobs and close factories, in the political action committees that fund campaigns and shape legislation, in the media empires that manufacture consent for policies that enrich the few at the expense of the many. The staged and professionally theater-managed January 6th Capitol riot, the heavily funded illusionary rise of populist movements on left and right, the erosion of trust in every major institution, these are the stirrings of the barbarian armies within the gates. They're the product of decades of deindustrialization, financial extraction, vast and growing inequality, and vast impoverishment and indebtedness. The financialist class, the descendants of the Praetorian Guard of ancient Rome, has stolen most all can be stolen, and now invites the barbarians within the gates, having left the non-repaired walls undefended. For comparative depth, consider these key aspects. Trigger: English Civil War 3.0. Elite war over wealth legitimacy and power loci. Roman split and Byzantium rise. Civil wars over imperial succession and economic collapse. Influencers. In the English Civil War 3.0, continental financialists and Praetorian banks. In the Roman split and Byzantium rise, the Praetorian Guard, barbarian alliances, and economic elites. The Old Center. English Civil War 3.0 has London captured post-1688 by holding the crown. The Roman split and Byzantium rise. The Old Center was Rome, decayed by internal corruption and invasion. The New Center, the English Civil War 3.0. The new center for the English Civil War 3.0 is Washington, can't escape total external control. In the Roman split and Byzantium rise, it was Constantinople, resilient hub for centuries. Outcome: English Civil War 3.0, liberation of English-speaking peoples after 400 years. Roman split and Byzantium rise, Byzantine continuity of Roman civilization for 1,000+ years. Global impact: English Civil War 3.0. Demophil elements strained in global empires, and demophil it stands for, hold on, can't remember the exact term. Comprehensive analytical framework representing the 7 core instruments of national power used by governments to achieve strategic objectives: diplomatic, informational, military, economic, financial, intelligence, and law enforcement. Expands on the traditional dime model, offering a more holistic approach to security and cooperation. So those elements are strained in global empires, and the Roman split and Byzantium rise parallel is the preservation of Roman legacy amid Western fall and Eastern defenses. The stake: what Washington prevails actually means. If this analysis is correct, then the outcome of English Civil War 3.0 will determine whether Washington can become a new Constantinople, a center of resilient, adaptive civilization that preserves the core of English-speaking values for centuries to come, or whether it will follow old Rome into decay and collapse. For Washington to prevail means something very specific. It means breaking the financialist stranglehold on American institutions. It means reasserting political control over monetary policy, auditing and reforming the Federal Reserve to ensure it serves the public interest rather than the interests of bondholders and bankers. It means breaking up monopolistic financial institutions deemed too big to fail and therefore too powerful to control. It means reorienting economic policy to reward production and innovation over financial engineering, rewriting the tax code, trade policy, and regulatory framework to favor those who create value over those who extract it. And it means ending the regime of perpetual war, which is the primary engine of national debt and financialist profit. Who does that sound like? Reasserting political control over monetary policy, auditing and reforming the Federal Reserve to ensure it serves the public interest rather than the interests of bondholders and bankers. Breaking up monopolistic financial institutions deemed too big to fail and therefore too powerful to control. Maybe jury's out on that, we'll see. Reorienting economic policy to reward production and innovation over financial engineering. So rewriting the tax code, rewriting trade policy, rewriting the regulatory framework to favor those who create value over those who extract it. But then there's the question of ending the regime of perpetual war, which is the primary engine of national debt and financialist profit. And, but EM, you say. But king-pilled, you say. What does this have to do with Iran? Doesn't it seem like this is what they're not doing? They're continuing the regime of perpetual war. Well, let's continue. This isn't a program for isolationism or autarky. Constantinople didn't withdraw from the world. It engaged with it, trading with East and West, forming alliances when necessary, fighting when unavoidable. But it did so from a position of internal strength and coherence. Its survival for a millennium wasn't the result of geographic good fortune alone. It was the result of institutions that worked, an elite that served the state rather than plundering it, and a population that identified its interests with the empire's survival. The parallels with contemporary Greece are instructive. As one historian notes, the modern Greek state has long grappled with a debate between pro-Western factions, who argue that Greece must fully embrace European integration, and those who perceive this alignment as a form of cultural and political surrender. The latter faction advocates for a stronger emphasis on Greek sovereignty, orthodox values, and an independent foreign policy. They draw on the Byzantine legacy of pragmatic diplomacy and strategic autonomy. Greece's dilemma is the English-speaking world's dilemma, writ small. Integration into transnational structures brings economic benefits, but also erodes sovereignty and cultural identity. The Byzantine model suggests a third way: engagement without subordination, cooperation without surrender. As the historian Theodoros Rakis argues, quote, by reviving this legacy, Greece could adopt a more balanced foreign policy, engaging constructively with the EU, NATO, and regional neighbors like Turkey, while strengthening its strategic autonomy. The same logic applies to the United States. Engagement with the world is necessary and desirable, but engagement from a position of weakness, with a hollowed-out economy, a captured political system, and a demoralized population, isn't engagement, it's subordination. The first task of American statecraft must be internal reconstruction, the rebuilding of productive capacity, the restoration of political accountability, the reassertion of national sovereignty over transnational financial power. It is a civil war that is being fought the world over, a civil war within the English-speaking peoples that must be won if our more than 1,000-year civilization is to survive at all, if our people are to survive at all. Conclusion: the threshold of transformation. The crises of the 21st century aren't random events. They're the unfolding consequences of a 400-year struggle within English-speaking civilization over who will rule and for whose benefit. The Inglorious Revolution of 1688 created an institutional template, a private central bank managing public debt, a financial class whose interests were fused with state power, that's proven remarkably durable and portable. That template crossed the Atlantic with the American colonists, survived the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution, and was successfully relocated from London to Washington after World War II. Now, that template faces its ultimate challenge. The financialist type that it empowered have grown so powerful that they threaten the sovereignty of the very states that nurtured them. Global debt stands at unprecedented levels. Central banks have become the dominant actors in financial markets. Inequality has reached heights not seen since the Gilded Age. and the political systems of the English-speaking world seem incapable of addressing these challenges, precisely because they've been captured by the interests that profit from them and turned against the very native peoples who have for 400 years fueled the entire system of global graft and theft. This isn't a counsel of despair. Empires don't simply fall, they transform under the pressure of elite failures and popular revolts. The Western Roman Empire fell, but the Eastern Empire endured for another millennium, preserving and transmitting the legacy of Rome to future generations. The question for our time is whether the English-speaking peoples can effect a similar transformation, whether we can throw off the corrupting influence of the financialists and rebuild our civilization on a sounder foundation. The stakes could not be higher. If Washington succumbs to the same forces that consumed London, if it remains a captured city serving financialist interests rather than the public good, then the English-speaking world will follow old Rome into decay and collapse. The barbarians will not need to breach the gates. They find the gates already open, the walls unguarded, the population indifferent to its own fate, as they've been for nearly 40 years. He's mentioned this several times, but the demoralization of the population, making the population indifferent, apathy, fatigue. This is part of the reason why all of the hysterical dooming, like not even getting into the substance of the conversation about it, is that the posture of these people with respect to the conversation is busted from the get-go. If you're approaching the conversation from this perspective of hysterical dooming, then you need to go for a run. You need to go lift some weights. You need to go check out of politics for a little while until you actually have the frame of mind proper to sober analysis and a perspicacious understanding of the facts on the ground. Because demoralization, if the population is demoralized and apathetic and checked out, none of the rest of this stuff matters. But if Washington can become a new Constantinople, if it can break free from financialist control, rebuild its productive economy, restore political accountability, and reassert its sovereignty, then English civilization may endure for centuries to come. It will face challenges as Constantinople faced Persians, Arabs, and Turks. It will make compromises and suffer defeats, but it will survive. We stand at the threshold of this transformation. The outcome isn't predetermined. It will be determined by the choices we make in the coming years, in every election, every policy debate, every moment of crisis. The war of our time is English Civil War 3.0. Its outcome will shape the future, not only of the English-speaking peoples, but of the entire world. Appendix, tracing continuity across empires, the Demophil elements. To illustrate the continuity of power mechanisms across empires, consider how each of the 7 elements of national power has been employed from Rome to the present. Diplomatic, so British Empire had alliances with European powers, Triple Entente. U.S. post-World War II had the Marshall Plan aid to rebuild Europe and contain communism. Roman Empire had treaties with Parthians and Persians to secure borders. And the modern tension is U.S.-China trade negotiations amid tariff wars and G7 versus BRICS. The informational domain. British Empire had colonial propaganda via newspapers and missions. Post-World War II U.S. had Hollywood's Cold War narratives and Voice of America. The Roman Empire had imperial cults and edicts proclaiming divine rule. And the modern tension is social media disinformation campaigns, and TikTok is a vector of Chinese influence. The military domain. The British Empire had naval supremacy and the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Post-World War II U.S. has NATO interventions in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Roman Empire had legions defending against barbarians in Adrianople in 378 AD. And then the modern tension is proxy conflicts in Ukraine and the U.S.-China tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Economic domain, British Empire had mercantilist trade monopolies in India and Africa. Post-World War II U.S. has WTO-driven globalization and free trade agreements. Roman Empire had grain imports from Egypt funding the state. And the modern tension is supply chain disruptions and U.S.-China decoupling and the industrial policy revival. The financial domain, the British Empire had Bank of England loans financing the Napoleonic Wars. Post-World War II U.S. has dollar hegemony enabling sanctions and debt leverage. Roman Empire had currency reforms in Constantine Salatus in 324 AD. And modern tension is cryptocurrencies versus CBDCs and de-dollarization efforts by BRICS. Intelligence domain, British Empire had espionage networks in colonial territories. Post-World War II U.S. had CIA operations during Cold War and beyond. Roman Empire had frumentarii spies monitoring internal threats, and modern tension is cyber espionage, the SolarWinds hack of 2020, and Huawei security concerns. And lastly, law enforcement. British Empire had colonial policing suppressing uprisings. Post-World War II U.S. has extradition treaties, international law enforcement cooperation. Roman Empire had Praetorian Guard enforcing imperial decrees. And the modern tension is global sanctions enforcement and ICC investigations. And then here is an extremely long list of citations. This guy says, you and your core group argue that this is the fight the administration is undertaking, and it may well be true, but perceptions matter. Trump's bombast, threats of war and regime change doesn't sell it to a population indifferent to its own fate. A little honesty and humility might. And EM replied, Ragnar, Henry VIII, George III, Trump, etc. all had to appear crazy in order to successfully navigate the world and the power structures around them in their own times. We're in a time where civility has led to and masks the pure evil that is chemical and genital mutilation of children. There's vastly more honesty and humility in Trump than any other president of my life, and I'm nearly 60 this year. Only he's more than one audience that he must speak to every single time he speaks. So, now, I wanted to read that whole thing because this has been, obviously, if you're listening to Luongo or Ian Burlingame or any of the guys kind of in this broader orbit, you've been listening to Labe for a while, you've been sort of gearing toward this direction, understanding the real baddies as being what he's calling the financialist class, the financialist type that has had its power centers, but its power center has been London. And a lot of people get bogged down on thinking that this has to do with like the actual British government or British people or something in those along those lines, and that's not correct. It's like if you spoke of the Roman Empire, if we speak of the Roman Empire, you think of the apparatus of the Roman Empire, and then Romans, people who were employed or operating or existing or holding power within the Roman Empire structure. You could speak of them sort of. I can't remember what the term is for it. Some sort of. Is it a metonym or some sort of nym, some type, where you, like you might refer to the capital, you might say like Washington. And when you say Washington, you're referring to like the public policy apparatus in Washington. In the same way, when you say Britain or the British, this is, within this context, it's a reference to the power structures within the British Empire. The people who have wielded power within the British Empire, which some of them are visible, many of them are not. And some of them are Jews, some of them are Jewish aligned, some of them are using Jews. For some of them, they find Jews to be a useful asset because they have, I don't know, particular tendencies that can be taken advantage of. That's why Israel was created. Israel was not created by Jews. Israel was created by the British. Now, the Americans were helping them, but again, when I say British, I'm not saying the British government. I'm not saying the British Parliament. I'm saying the apparatuses of the British Empire, which originated out of Britain and then expanded to cover most of the world and has consolidated into two primary power centers in actual Britain and in Washington/New York. But increasingly, those power centers are starting to diverge from one another. And I don't think that Trump has this mentality. I don't think that Trump sees his job as to liberate the American people from the oppressive British overlords. I don't think he sees it this way at all. But I think this is the historical trajectory of what's happening. And the people who are making decisions on the ground are making decisions that are driving in this direction. So if you understand that we're operating within the auspices of British power, Anonymous!
put the wiener in and around my mouth and butthole with extra coleslaw while I die for Israel because my president told me to. P.S. Happy Texas Independence Day.
More whiners! We've got so many whiners here tonight. Thank you, Anonymous. Happy Texas Independence Day to you as well. Miss Send Bobs and whiners. My wife says, get Matt to the goal tonight or he may just hobo on a train and never come back to us. Yeah. It is a new month. A new month. And the grind continues. What was I saying? So, yeah, so we're operating under the auspices of the British Empire, which effectively covered the globe. There isn't a region in the world that has not been touched by the British Empire. Now, the power structures of the British Empire were inhabited by both British and non-British people. So you might have Frenchmen or Swedes or Swiss or Dutch or American or Israeli or Mexican or Indian or whatever, but they're still operating within the auspices of the British Empire, which has been the predominant power and has had particular techniques and methods that they have used to extend and consolidate and their power and to manipulate various different events. So this is the context within which we need to understand everything else. Now let's see here. I wanted to do a little fluid with the order in which I have all this stuff. I think right now I am going to let's talk about this real quick. So, A.G. Hamilton is a little bit. He's younger, but he's kind of a boomer con. But this was an interesting point he made. So he says, "So I'm back from the United States. I was in Mexico this past week, but for obvious reasons, did not want to post publicly about it. One thing I will note is that a lot of the social media panic early in the week did not translate to reality on the ground in Mexico for American tourists. There was a clear effort to reassure tourists with a lot of military personnel. And even in Puerto Vallarta, I was told that the cartel was very careful about avoiding tourists during their retaliation. I asked several people why they thought the cartel was so wary of harming Americans, given American intel clearly played a role in taking down El Mencho, and had several people directly say some version of, they're afraid of Trump. I have plenty of disagreements with Trump on domestic and foreign policy, but there's no doubt for me that the perception of Trump as someone who is willing to use force and a little crazy has the effect of helping keep Americans safer abroad, even from relatively violent actors. And I think, again, it's easy for people to like over-index on Iran and see as Iran is like simply this matter of Iran versus Israel, and it exists entirely within that one single vacuum. But I think you're really losing the plot here if you're not seeing this trajectory. You're not seeing this continuity of events here. Even just this year. Venezuela, Maduro in Venezuela. Then El Mencho in Mexico. Then the Ayatollah. What do these things have in common? Clearly they're connected. And what is the thing that connects all of them? It's their relationship to the financialists, as Ian Burlingame calls them. Their relationship to these various different tentacles of the British Empire that have been, the nature of this empire was to extend itself out, embed itself in all these different regions, and then intentionally set up conflict points, conflict zones, try to own both sides of a negotiation to ensure that no matter how the negotiation, whether the negotiation happens with pens or with guns, to ensure that they come out ahead. They've built up all these different apparatuses, and those apparatuses collectively together represent a clear and present danger to the United States. So someone who could be ignorant of all the stuff Ian Burlingame just wrote about, but someone who recognizes that their responsibility is to protect and defend the sovereignty of the United States is invariably going to wind up clashing with each of these different elements. And we're seeing a clear methodology in the way that Trump is going about managing all these different matters that all implicate each other. Iran implicates Venezuela. Venezuela implicates Cuba. Cuba implicates Mexico. Iran implicates China. China implicates Russia. Russia implicates Iran. Russia implicates Ukraine. Ukraine implicates Britain and Germany and France and Brussels. Iran implicates Italy. Iran implicates France. Iran implicates Spain. All these different, you can't over-index on one single understanding or interpretation of all of these different moving pieces. So to act like the Iranian matter is strictly a concern of Israel is, at this point, a willful ignorance. It's so over and above the level of reasonableness that it can only be willful ignorance. So I don't want to touch on these things here just yet, the actual fact patterns on here. So let me go next to this here. We're gonna watch this Promethean action thing here in just a moment, but I want to set up a few other things for it before that. Theodore Dragonsbane says, but Matt, you forget people can hold more than one thing in their mind at once. I think you mean people can't. Yeah. Some people can. Hold on. Okay. So Matt Moore says something that everyone seems to be overlooking. The Trump administration's clearly stated objective is to hand off operational control of the Middle East to our regional allies. To be clear, what's happening with Iran right now is Trump's exit strategy. Spread out amongst all of our U.S. military installations in the Middle East, we've maintained a constant on-the-ground presence of approximately 45,000 men, costing us somewhere around $5 billion per year. Trump wants this to come to an end. However, in order for this regional handoff and subsequent U.S. withdrawal to take place, the Iranian regime and its capacity to project military power, destabilize the region, and interfere with economic activity needs to come to an end. Step 1, cripple the Iranian regime. Step 2, hand off operational control of the Middle East to our regional allies. Step 3, withdraw from the region. The final chapter of the Bush-Obama era war on terror. The reality is, for the first time in over 2 decades, we have a president who's actually taking steps towards concluding the never-ending Middle Eastern quagmire. America first. And this is the thing that the Panicans don't want to, they can't engage in a good faith discussion on this matter. They say we shouldn't be involved in the Middle East. No blood and treasure going to the Middle East. Okay, so you want the United States, the most powerful global hegemon, to withdraw its interests from this extremely important area in the world. So how do they go about that? Let's have a conversation. Is this just, you like sign on a paper, bring everyone home, and just indiscriminately just like withdraw? Of course not. That region is going to have to be stable because of the deep implications it has on global trade. Because of the fact that America is going to have allies. And part of having allies is the recognition that you're going to support them against enemies of theirs. Clearly, Saudi Arabia and Iran have deep antipathies. There's reports coming out here that MBS has been pushing for these strikes, which makes total sense. Of course they want this resolved. And what was the price tag on this for us? $3 trillion worth of investment from the Gulf states into the United States to allow rapid reindustrialization, to allow Trump to do all of the domestic things that everyone wants him to do, without just turning on the money printers. You get all this foreign investment that comes into the country to bypass the Fed and allow us to rapidly reindustrialize. Well, what's the cost of that? We want you to stabilize this region because you're basically the only ones who can take this particular regime that's a thorn in the side of everyone around them and resolve them. What's the evidence for that? When they get struck, they just lash out at everyone. They just start indiscriminately lobbing missiles at all of their neighbors. And every single one of their neighbors is like, please continue. Can we send you some military support and personnel in pursuit of your mission with respect to the Iranian state? Russia has hung them out to dry. China has hung them out to dry. Nobody's intervening on their behalf. So this isn't like this is just some poor, innocent state that's just minding their own business. And then the big baddies come over there just to fuck them up for the fun of it. You could be aware of the problem that the Jewish state causes. You can recognize that problem and see it as a variable that needs to be managed without just automatically becoming an ardent supporter of the Ayatollah. Now, what's very, very obvious in the way that this has played out over the last several days is that there are multiple factions within Iran. And this is another thing. All the hysterical panicking seems to leave no space for the recognition of the intrastate nuances in each of these cases. There are different factions in each nation that are vying for power. Yes, in Israel, there are different factions that are vying for power. Some of them are completely insane, bloodthirsty, fit every single stereotype, and are willing to nuke the entire world to get what they want. Others are not. They recognize that that's a clear and present danger to their own survival. And within Iran, it's very clear that you have the British-backed elements. And again, I'm not saying, when I say British, I'm not saying Keir Starmer. I'm not even saying Parliament or even the Crown necessarily. I'm saying these remnants, this class, this financialist type that has maintained elite control over the now centuries-old British systems. They have their own elements within Iran. And those elements happen to fit the type that exists in all these other little hotspots where you've got this like renegade, revolutionary communist, given over to terrorism. Like this is like a story we keep seeing over and over and over again. And they all just happen to be affiliated with British or French intelligence. Time and time and time again. And so you get these mixed signals coming out where they're both negotiating with Iran, but then they're also missile striking Iran. But then they're negotiating, but then they're missile striking, but then they're negotiating, and then they're missile striking. It's almost like they're negotiating with one faction while they're striking the other faction. Where do you think they're getting this intelligence? For who to strike and when and where? That's coming from within Iran. When Trump says, we're going to take out the Ayatollah and we're going to keep bombing these people until someone wants to play ball, that's when he says, all of the civilian military, all of the law enforcement, any other leadership within the country, lay down your arms and cooperate with us and you'll live. That's because those elements exist there within the country. When he says we're going to do regime change, he's not saying we're going to go in there and we're going to occupy. He's saying anybody who wants to take control of the country and work against us, we're going to kill you. And we're going to open up a vacuum for somebody else to step in. And are you going to work with us? No, we're going to kill you. Is anyone else going to step in? You want to work with us? You do? Great. We're not going to kill you. What did he tell Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela, the number 2 behind Maduro? They yoinked Maduro out. And then he said about her, he said, she seems pretty impressive, like she's willing to work with us and give us what we want. And so as long as she does that, she's fine. If she doesn't, she's going to get worse than Maduro. What does that mean? What's worse than Maduro? Worse than Maduro is killed. He told her, as long as you work with us, you can live. If you stop working with us, you die. And then suddenly,
oh, the civil liberties, and oh my gosh, what about the human rights? And oh no, it's so bad.
if you are a potential leader of some shithole country and you want to try to get a big dick, you're going to die. This is a very honest form of foreign policy. Giga Jew! Oh no.
You need a sports drink sponsorship.
Thank you, Stephen Miller. I know that's literally you. I appreciate your contribution. Yes, I do need to get a sports drink sponsorship. Sport drink. I do need it. That's been on the to-do list. I would like to get to that. Thank you, Giga Jew. Okay, let's do it. Let's get to a couple of these things here. Just kind of the actual fact patterns of stuff that has happened. Sec War. Pete Hegseth's direct message to the Joint Force. After living basically my entire life with secretaries of defense who are just stuffy eggheads, having a secretary of war who, in these moments, comes out and talks like this, I can understand why I keep hearing reports of how all of the guys who are in theater, all of the what was it Tom Luongo said, the real pipe hitting niggers, all of those guys, I understand why they love Pete Hegseth and why they are geeked to be involved in this whole operation.
Speak straight to you, the Joint Force, our warriors on the front lines. This is your moment. This is the generational turning point America has waited for since 1979, and since the rudderless wars of hubris, my generation, our generation, endured. Don't listen to the noise. Just stay focused. Our commander-in-chief is steady at the wheel. We face a determined enemy, but you are better. But we must prove it every single day. History doesn't care if we're tired, if we're scared, or if the fight feels big. It demands warriors who rise anyway. Peace through strength, the warrior ethos, lethality, unity of purpose, those are not slogans. They're the beating heart of what it means to wear the uniform, that uniform. You think clearly under fire, you act decisively in chaos, you uphold the Constitution, and you uphold our country without hesitation. We are not defenders anymore. We are warriors, trained to kill the enemy and break their will. History is watching. Be the force you swore an oath to be, focused, disciplined, lethal, and unbreakable. We will finish this on America First conditions of President Trump's choosing. Nobody else's, as it should be. And know this above all, President Trump and I have your back, always. Through fire, through criticism, through fake news, through everything. We unleash you because you are the best, most powerful, most lethal fighting force the world has ever seen. May Almighty God watch over you and his providential arms of protection extend over you. Godspeed, warriors, and keep going.
Yes, sir! There was one line in there. Absolute bar. The rudderless wars of hubris my generation endured. The rudderless wars of hubris. That is a bar. So Mark Caputo here says, history buffs, the White House hosted a fascinating call yesterday with this has been 2 days ago, with 3 administration officials who gave a rare behind-the-scene glimpse into the Iran talks and why Trump ordered strikes hours earlier. It's a first draft of history, so follow. First, shameless plug for the story, blah, blah, blah. Our story also relied on other insiders who laid out for us the parallel tracks Trump pursued before attacking Iran. So the joint U.S.-Israeli operation that killed Khamenei was the culmination of 2 months in which President Trump pursued both diplomacy and war on parallel tracks. On Friday, he chose war. The crisis, which began with the public uprising in Iran in late December, was vintage Trump, full of twists, last-minute reversals, and deliberate disinformation. In the end, the ambiguity was itself a strategic asset, leaving Iran's leadership vulnerable to the largest aerial attack ever conducted by the Israeli military. Here's how it happened. The seeds of Saturday's operation were planted in late December when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Trump at Mar-a-Lago. In keeping with common practice, all the officials spoke on background to the news media. Here, Senior Official 1 laid out the case for why Iran is and was a threat and how the U.S. believed Iran was planning to strike first. So this is quoting from the Trump Admin Official 1. Let me just set the template. What is the threat from Iran? The threat from Iran is ultimately their ambition to acquire nuclear weapons. But in the short term, it is the conventional missile capability that they have, particularly in the southern belt, that pose a threat to the United States and our allies in the region. And in fact, you're seeing that play out. The Iranian response has been driven by those missiles. Midnight Hammer last year obliterated their nuclear program, but it was made very clear to them that while it's obliterated, if you try to start to rebuild it, we will have to address it. We preferred to address it through diplomacy, and that effort ultimately was fruitless. But I want to focus on the front end, the missile threat that exists. That is an intolerable risk to the United States, as you're seeing play out now. As a result of these actions that were taken, they have now struck multiple civilian sites unrelated to military sites. They have hit hotels in Abu Dhabi. They've hit civilian sites in these countries, in addition to targeting our bases in the region. We understood very clearly that the Iranians would use that threat against us, perhaps preemptively. And in fact, we had indicators that they intended to use it potentially preemptively, but if not simultaneous with any actions against them immediately against our threats. Thank you, Cheeky. I don't know, hail Trump. Thank you for the 1,000 kicks. Official 1 said Trump ultimately had no choice and that Iran's ballistic missile program was too much of a threat to U.S. bases and allies in the region. And here's the thing, he's made it clear that the goal is to wind down the presence in the region. This is what the Abraham Accords, all the diplomacy and all this stuff that they're doing is all directed toward the ultimate goal of reducing their presence in the region. But that's not going to happen overnight. The region has to be stabilized before they can fully remove their presence, which means there are going to be American assets in theater. There are going to be allies who have interests that they want protected in return for that status as ally. This is the role of a nation state, particularly a global hegemon. You can say, America should be a global hegemon. Get out of the fucking kid's sandbox. Let's play in the real world. So if Iran has this instability about them, this clear and present danger that they represent to those assets, that's not something that you could say, well, we're actually anti-war and we don't want to get involved in anything unnecessarily, so the assets are already there. The assets are not going to be withdrawn yesterday. They're already there. They're going to be there for some sort of near-term foreseeable future. So if there is intelligence that Iran is planning to just strike things indiscriminately, as they've revealed they're willing to do, then that's something that has to be taken seriously. It doesn't matter what your posture on war is. That's something that has to be taken seriously. Here, hold on just a sec. Let me give you... Hold on one moment. Where do I find that? Over here. Is it here? I'm trying to grab you guys the link to the Ko-fi page because I forgot to update the link for it. So I'll just do this. It should work, assuming that you you follow the the constraints that the automation has. Like, it'll work either way. You can send the money to me that way, but you got to make sure there's no non-alphanumeric characters, including spaces, in the name on it, and you got to keep the messages relatively short so they don't exceed the 255 character limit. So there's the Ko-fi link. It's ko-fi.com/theastrolabe. That's ko-fi.com/theastrolabe. The president decided he was not going to sit back and allow American forces in the region to absorb attacks from conventional missiles. We had analysis that basically told us if we sat back and waited to get hit first, the amount of casualties and damage would be substantially higher than if we acted in a preemptive defensive way to prevent those launches from occurring. So they have credible intelligence that there is going to be a preemptive strike from Iran, that Iran is willing to do that, planning to do that. It's a conceivable possibility. And if, thank you, Nematoder. And then they conclude, well, if we strike them first, we can actually reduce their ability to strike us. So it'll be better for us to strike them before they strike us. Now, the backdrop to all of this is that they are continuing to negotiate. So it's not like this is just speculating in the like wholly disconnected from one another. They're actively engaged negotiating. But what's the one thing that's not happening? We've seen Trump talked to Kim Jong-un. Trump has talked to Putin. Trump has talked to Netanyahu. Trump has talked to Xi. Trump has talked to like every major world leader. Trump was talking to Maduro up until he got yoinked. Who has Trump never been able to talk to? Never once did he ever meet and talk with the Ayatollah. So it's almost like they weren't really serious about negotiating. This isn't like a coherent, stable nation that's engaging in good faith and just wants to get along with everyone around them. Clearly not. There's clearly many, many off-ramps they had where if that was their goal, they could have done that. But what Iran is it's actually, there's like you have the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the mullahs, and then you've got the civilian government and the civilian military. These are separate power structures. And the IRGC is very, very clearly a cutout for the globalists, whatever you want to call them. They're very clearly a cutout for that exists there precisely for the purposes of creating instability and maintaining an outpost whereby events in the Middle East can be manipulated toward perpetual conflict. So yeah, the British proxy didn't want to negotiate. And no one in good faith can say that there was not an attempt made to negotiate. You can say, well, it's not reasonable to say that they can't have a nuclear weapon. They should be able to have a nuclear weapon if they want. No. No. Just no. The answer is no. You can complain all you want about the fundamental human rights of some third world Middle Eastern country, but you can't also lay claim to being an American patriot at the same time. No. Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. And this is something that Trump has been consistent about for multiple decades. Now, if Iran was constituted differently, they weren't a nation associated with bad faith negotiating, with relentless shit stirring, and setting themselves up as an outpost for Chinese power projection and funding terrorism and all these other sorts of things, which are all true, irrespective of Israel. Obviously, Israel has their own beef with Iran, but that's not the only element of statecraft, or whatever you want to call it, happening in the Middle East. Iran is clearly with the power structure that has existed up until the Ayatollah was knocked off. Iran has existed as a bad faith nation that's clearly willing to color outside the lines in bad faith and malevolent intent toward other nations in the region. This is completely indisputable. They were given more than enough chances to get their shit together. That's the focus of the campaign right now. And so far, it's proven quite effective at attriting their launcher capability. And hopefully that path will continue. Because again, it doesn't matter, or not again, but this is a point that Luongo made pretty often during the 12-day war, that it doesn't matter how many missiles they have at a given time. What matters is how many launchers they have. So if you take out the launchers, it's like if you take out someone's, if you take someone's guns, then it doesn't matter how much ammo they have. They can't do anything with it. So it's the launchers. Now, the launcher capability is not a static number. They can continue building launchers. And so they've gone in, they've taken out launchers, and they're like, okay, we've reduced your capacity. We've indicated to you we're very serious here. Can we negotiate and come to some sort of a peaceful settlement here, where you could begin to be integrated into the world with your regional nations to exist in some sort of a peaceful stasis? But no, they're just like, they're rebuilding again. All right. And you could say, well, of course they're going to rebuild because they've got Israel right there. Yeah, sure. This is the plight that has befallen the Iranian state. They have a hostile neighbor, and they're doing everything they can to provoke that hostile neighbor as often as they can. So it's like, you two are fighting. One of you is going to win and one of you is going to lose. And Iran could read the writing on the wall. You're going to lose. So you could continue asserting your own sovereignty. No. We get to be the big boys. We're going to have attain a level of nuclear deterrence that allows us to do whatever we want indiscriminately. No. You're just not going to. Like, at the end of the day, you can say, you can talk about how the Confederacy had the moral right to do this or that or whatever. But at the end of the day, they lost the war. They lost and they were punished for losing. Same thing's happening with Iran. If you want the United States to withdraw from the Middle East, it's going to require that someone is deprecated. And it really shouldn't matter to you who. You just want the United States out of there. So let's get the fastest track to someone being deprecated such that there's a stable peace in the Middle East and the United States can withdraw. In the negotiations, they, being Iran, refused in every instance. Sue!
Trump said 4 weeks to fix Iran, but it'll probably take half that time. Why? Under promise, over deliver. Art of the deal. If he takes longer,
so true.
I still golf. Kill the British Empire cancer in every country until each lime's a boiled goose.
Yeah, he said 4 weeks. And I agree. Probably under promising and over delivering. But in either case, like, it's going to take as long as it needs to take. We live in the real world. It's going to take as long as it needs to take. In the negotiations, they refused in every instance and consistently have refused to address ballistic missiles. They will not even talk about it. They won't talk about it with us. They won't talk about it with our regional partners. They will not talk about those missiles at all. And for us, that was also an unacceptable situation to be in. So the president, frankly, had no choice. We cannot continue to live in a world where these people not only possess missiles, but the ability to make 100 of them a month in perpetuity to overwhelm any potential defenses. We're not going to be held hostage by them, and we're not going to let them hit us first, because it would have substantially increased the risk to our troops in the region and to our allies by that matter. Official 2 said that Iran refused to address terrorist proxies. This is Official 2. I'll just add on the back of what Official 1 said. Also, their unwillingness to address the proxies, which also have caused a lot of chaos and destruction and instability in the region as well, which President Trump also thought was a critical issue that needed to be addressed in any deal that was done. So I'll back up for just a minute and give the context of what we were trying to achieve in the negotiation. President Trump was very clear to his negotiators that he wanted to see a deal achieved that would be a real deal, which basically meant addressing the regional issues and making sure that Iran would never have the ability to possess a nuclear weapon. And that was what we set out to do. We studied the past, the deals of the past, their deficiencies, and we went with very blunt asks and very direct communication of what our expectations were that would allow all the people to live better lives and for the region to be more stable and secure. The context of the negotiation was Iran, obviously, is at a very, very weak point, where they just had the protests where they brutally massacred a lot of their innocent protesters. Their economy is reeling, and obviously they had big setbacks with Midnight Hammer and with the attacks from the 12-day war. Official 2 continues, President Trump moved his military resources to the region and did it very overtly to show that he was playing a strong hand. And we communicated to them that this was something that would occur if we did not see real progress on a real deal very quickly. So in that context, we approached with a very, very strong hand and were very explicit about that, hoping to get the real offer out of them to see if it was possible. Basically, there's several elements that showed us that there was no seriousness to achieve a real deal, and that was what we felt after the negotiations. One of the things I'll talk about is we went through why they needed enrichment capabilities, what they needed fuel for. Their claim, which is that it was for civil liberties, we said, okay, there's many countries that have safe civil nuclear programs. Let's come up with a real guardrail and framework that mimic those countries. And not only will we be able to do a deal with you on that basis, we'll also help subsidize it. One of the things we offered them was, we said, we will give you free nuclear fuel forever. And they basically said that didn't work for them. They needed to enrich uranium. And we basically said, well, that makes absolutely no sense. And so they agreed for a short period of time to not do enrichment, basically. But the fact that they weren't willing to take free nuclear fuel was a big tell to us that they were looking to buy time while they're weak and get to a place where they, over time, can enrich. And that's like, you could say this isn't true, that they're just lying or bullshitting or whatever. Again, there's such an information asymmetry here that you could just like fact-free assume that and, I don't know, to like knock yourselves out. But okay, now we're just gonna write fan fiction about what we imagined happened, instead of what's been pretty transparently communicated constantly throughout this entire process. This has like zero bear. I was alive in 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2000. I was alive then. I remember what it was like. This is clearly a whole different approach to diplomacy and negotiation, military strategy. It's clearly very different. So if they say, we will give you free nuclear fuel forever, if they say that that's what they said, I have no basis for doubting that. If they were offering them free nuclear fuel and Iran's like, no, we need to enrich uranium, we need a nuclear weapon, yeah, that's just a red line. No, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon. There has to be some give and take here. There has to be some level of trust and openness and recognition of the fundamental power imbalance here. And maybe they just thought, oh, Trump won't do it because midterms or whatever. And so they thought they were negotiating from a position of strength that they didn't have. And again, when I say they, there's multiple different factions within Iran. So when Trump says, we're going to take out this leadership, and we have other people that are going to step into that, we have other candidates for that role, think back again to Venezuela. When he says regime change, he's saying the IRGC, the Ayatollah, they're not going to run the show the way that they have in the past. They're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to have this revolutionary Islamic communist British-backed proxy government. No, we're offering a massive carrot. You will be fully integrated into the global economy. We will play policeman with you and all your neighbors and ensure that everybody's treating each other nice as long as we all agree to terms. If you won't even agree to terms, where does that leave us? Now, in the past, it would have been, okay, well, we're going to go invade and overthrow all of the existing institutions and establish all new institutions and expect that to hold. Clearly, that was not the intent. The intent was to perpetuate the chaos, to create all the opportunities for grift and arbitrage and human trafficking and drug trafficking and all that sort of thing. That's not what the Trump administration's offering. The Trump administration is saying, you can keep everything exactly the same. Everybody can stay in the same positions that they're in. You need to change your behavior. If you don't change your behavior, the positions can remain, but the people are going to die. We're going to start with the Ayatollah and his inner circle. You're going to die. Someone else can step in. You get a chance now. Just like Delcy Rodriguez, you get the chance to play ball. If you play ball, you can maintain the structure of whatever you want to maintain. But you're not going to get a nuke. Official 3 said U.S. intelligence showed how Iran was rebuilding its nuclear program after the Midnight Hammer strikes. So this is the third official. Says, we were reading the intel and it was very, very clear to us that they were in the throes of rebuilding all that had been destroyed in the Operation Midnight Hammer attack. And that is the Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo facilities, 2 of which were enrichment facilities, and the other one, Isfahan, was also a conversion facility, which is an essential ingredient to get to weapons-grade 90% fissionable material. So one of the things that we said to the Iranians was we wanted to see, after the first meeting, we wanted to see some sort of plan from them as to how they would address our enrichment demands on material and also on enrichment capability. They brought with them a 7-page plan. Interestingly enough, they wouldn't leave it with us, but they did hand it to us and allowed us to read it, thinking that we would never actually spend the time in reading it. They basically premised their program on their internal needs and then had a flowchart at the back that showed what their internal needs would be. The IAEA estimated that this would result in enrichment capability that was roughly 5 times more than laid out in the JCPOA, and the IAEA can attest to that. Here are 2 examples of some of the things that they were working on, irrespective of the fact that they said they were only looking to do things in a civil nuclear way. Let's see here. A research reactor that needs 20% enrichment protocols in order to build radioisotopes to make medicines and do agricultural research. Oh, here we go. It wasn't letting me see the top. 1, it was determined that they have the ability to internally build their own centrifuges. We're talking about IR6 centrifuges. Those are the fastest ones out there. Centrifuges essentially acting like washing machines where they spin in a very fast way. The faster they go, the more efficient is the process, and so is the reason for them stocking 60% weapons-grade material and 20% weapons-grade material. So they built up this manufacturing capacity since the Midnight Hammer attack. That's one very undeniable point. There's many more than this. We're just taking it through 2 or 3 right here. Here's a point that I think is critical. Unattacked in the Midnight Hammer attack was the Tehran Research Reactor, which in theory is a research reactor that needs 20% enrichment protocols in order to build radioisotopes to make medicines and do agricultural research. Everybody had always thought that they were operating in a correct way at Tehran Research Reactor. Turns out that we have now gotten information from the IAEA that never once did they use any of the fissionable material there to make even a single medicine. They had a couple of experiments, but it was all designed to deceive what they were really doing. They were manufacturing 20% fissionable material in Isfahan, claiming it was being sent to TRR to perform this research, when in fact it was being stockpiled. Now, why would you do that? Because 20% fissionable material is a very short way away from 90% fissionable material, particularly when you have IR6 centrifuges working for you. And that baseline, not starting at 3.67, which of course was the JCPOA baseline, using 20% allowed them to leap forward and stockpile material that ultimately amounted to 450 roughly kilograms of 60% material. Technically, that 60% material would only be 1 week away from getting to 90% weapons grade. These are all violations of not just these protocols they lived under, but also what we demanded after Operation Midnight Hammer. And I can tell you that for every one of the 3 violations I just gave you, which are egregious, we've got 5 more. So lots of problems here. And the proper way to understand this is that this was a City of London outpost for manufacturing like off-grid or underground nuclear weapons that can be facilitated around the world at any point when necessary. This is a point that, before I continue with this, I just remembered something I was going to say earlier. If you go listen to those Tommy's podcast episodes where they were talking about this kind of model of everything that's going on, Ian Burlingame made a very interesting point. He said that given all of the hits that this financialist, global human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, illicit finance, that whole overseas network, all of the hits that they've been taking increasingly lately, it was backing him into a corner where he said his assumption is that the ultimate escalation that they were getting very close to is nuking Israel. He was like, if your goal was really to kick off World War III, which it seems as if there's definitely significant power centers working toward that end, if your goal is to kick off World War III, there's few options on the table that would be as sure to accomplish that as nuking Israel. Now, you might say trying to nuke the homeland, nuke the American homeland somehow, especially, and he said a dirty nuke. He suggested that this is part of the reason why they were just obliterating these fast boats coming across the Gulf. Because if your goal was to try to slip one of these into the mainland of the United States, that might be how you would do it. So no, they're just obliterating them from the air. That would also be why they had such a huge mass of forces there in the Caribbean at the time that they were dealing with the issue down in Venezuela, is all of the sensory capabilities and all of the communications monitoring capabilities that they would have. And then if that goal was being cut off by them, by all their fast boats, by the cartel fast boats getting nuked on, not nuked, but you know what I mean, on their way up to across the Gulf, if that gets cut off and you need to move this device somewhere else in the world, how would you do that? Container ships, perhaps, disguised as oil transport vessels. And what happened? They started interdicting a bunch of these vessels that were heading across the Atlantic. There was several that were interdicted where it was kind of interesting. The stories that they gave didn't totally make a ton of sense, and it almost sounded like they assessed that some of these vessels potentially contained some sort of material like that. And I'm shortly before, I think this was like February 25, maybe, there was a brief moment where Chuck Schumer came out after Rubio talked to the Gang of Eight. Chuck Schumer came out and said that Rubio basically, like, the president needs to make his case to the American people. And he looked shook. He looked like whatever he just heard freaked the fuck out of him. So I don't know what sort of intelligence they had, but if it was something along these lines, then yeah, he saw a ghost. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. So is it possible that they had some sort of intelligence that implied basically we have assessed that there's going to be a dirty nuke being deployed in Israel or somewhere over there, somewhere associated with Iran? I don't know. I think it's very interesting speculation. And just to kind of substantiate that, let me jump over to this here real quick. Catherine Herridge, who it has a pretty immaculate record in terms of her, journalistic integrity and everything. So take this for what it's worth. She says, Operation Epic Fury, why Iran's ballistic missile force remains the greatest threat. These military testing memos are strong evidence Iran experimented with and deployed contaminated or dirty warheads against U.S. forces as early as January 2020. We obtained the memos as part of a recent investigation into the toxic fallout of Iran's 2020 ballistic missile strike on U.S. forces at the Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. 3 independent environmental experts who reviewed the military records told us actinium-228, bismuth-214, and cesium-137 seemed out of place with a conventional warhead. So she's got these Department of the Army memos here. Exposure to hazardous and toxic materials. All U.S. military assigned or attached to ARSO who served in this area for more than 2 weeks are directed to annotate this exposure on their DD Form 2769 Post-Deployment Health Assessment and DD Form 2900 Post-Deployment Health Reassessment. Additionally, members who experience symptoms, shortness of breath, rashes, unintentional weight loss, fatigue, memory concerns, etc., should consult with their flight surgeon or aeromedical physician assistant and specifically mention exposure to elevated risks of particulate matter noted above during their deployment. So, again, this is where like information asymmetry, we're probably never going to know this sort of thing for sure. But I got to say, given the history of behavior by the Iranians and this sort of behavior that's being described in the negotiations, it seems entirely plausible to me that the city of London would have been maintaining Iran, their control over Iran, to facilitate this sort of behavior for the purposes of setting off some sort of major false flag. And if you think that they wouldn't burn Israel in an instant to accomplish that, you're out of your mind. And this isn't something that the administration could come out and say, oh, we had credible evidence that they were going to nuke America, or they were gonna set off a dirty nuke in Tel Aviv or something. Like, they're not going to come out and declare that if that was the case. This one here. So officials too closed by summing up the mindset of the Trump White House. So I'll just conclude with one of the rules of deal making is that you have to know very quickly if there's a deal to do or not. And based on this, it was very clear that the intent for them was to preserve their ability to do enrichment so that over time they could use it for a nuclear bomb. If they wanted to have a civil, peaceful nuclear program, we offered them many, many ways to do that. But instead, that was met with games, tricks, and stall tactics. And that was really the conclusion that we came back with. And so we reported this to President Trump, and obviously he weighed the different options. But in the negotiation, this is what we uncovered. And we could have made another short-term bad deal, but it wouldn't have dealt with the long-term issue of Iran, which we all know what they stand for, what they've caused in the region and throughout the world. And obviously, based on this is why President Trump and a lot of other reasons took the decisive action that he did. So then, okay, here's the clip that dropped today that everyone's been losing their minds about. Here's Rubio talking about what the immediate legal pretext for the strike was, as they explained to the Gang of Eight.
The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Going back.
So everyone has taken this to mean that, they were helpless. They can't control Israel, and Israel's going to act without them, and so they were just backed into making this move. This is, again, more people with a conclusion already in mind, searching for a justification for asserting the conclusion they already have. They were clearly already planning on striking at some point. That was the premise behind all of the negotiations. They struck them. They hit them last year. They're continuing to negotiate while they're moving a bunch of assets into theater. Clearly, there was already an intent that they were going to, if necessary, come to the point where the strikes were going to happen. What he's describing here is the immediate legal pretext for the actions. Why now? Why are we striking now at this particular point? It's because the negotiations are showing no progress. They're clearly not engaging in good faith. The Israelis have their opportunity that they're going to strike. And if the Israelis strike and we don't, they're going to strike us because they're aware of the relationship between the United States and Israel. So you could say, well, Israel's a bad ally. They're backing them into this corner. They're not backing them into a corner. It's not like everything was all going peachy keen and fine, and then all of a sudden here comes Israel, Leroy Jenkins in, and they're just going to fuck everything up. Clearly, there was no progress being made on the negotiation front because Iran was not dealing in good faith. And it seems abundantly clear that the United States was negotiating in good faith. Just from the preponderance of evidence of all the things that have come down, what I just read, and everything that's gone down over the past year and a half, with a recognition that these are not equals. The United States and Iran are not equals. Iran is not entitled to be a sovereign nation that just gets to do whatever they want. When did this, shit libery overtake the so-called right wing? Iran, being a nation of the size that they are and the location that they are with the history that they've had, they don't get the presumption of sovereignty and they're just some poor innocents. No, they're going to be instructed on what your options are. And with a full awareness of what their options were, they chose to make the decisions that they did. And again, this seems to me as if this is City of London proxies who have been occupying Iran since the revolution, finally being cleared out. Just like the City of London proxy that was cleared out in Venezuela, and City of London proxies being cleared out in Mexico. There's others as well. This has been a pretty clear pretext by the administration all along. So here is, for more on this, the great MAGA grandma, Susan Kokinda. This is her video from, I believe this was today. Is this today or yesterday? Yeah, this is today, this afternoon. Bolton says Trump has no strategy. Chatham House says regime change can't be done from the air. Then Iran called Washington, not London, and Trump picked up. The regime changers are outside the room and can't even find the door. Here's another really easy pro tip for you geopolitics, aspiring geopolitics understanders. If you think that Trump striking Iran is a continuation of neoconservative foreign policy, then why are the neoconservatives chimping about it?
Why would John Bolton, the man who has wanted to bomb Iran for 30 years, suddenly sound the alarm about the president who finally did it? Politico's headline read, "John Bolton sounds the alarm on Trump's Iran gamble." And here's what Bolton told News Nation.
We can't get a completely straight answer from the president what his objective is. He says, with one set of remarks, it's regime change. And that, by the way, is my preferred objective. I'm entirely in favor of it. But then says in other remarks that this could be over with in a couple days. If this turns into a one-and-done operation, 2, 3, 4 days of strikes, and then President Trump says, okay, opposition, over to you, there's not going to be regime change.
Bolton's complaint was echoed across the British press and the foreign policy establishment. It's that the president is not on board with their policy of regime change. Chatham House, the intellectual arm of the British Foreign Office, chimed in, saying, you don't do regime change from the air. No strategy, can't be done from the air. That was the expert consensus over the weekend. Then on Sunday, President Trump sat down with The Atlantic and said this about the Iranians. They want to talk, and I've agreed to talk, so I will be talking to them. They should have done it sooner. They waited too long. Iran's new leadership called Washington, not London, and Trump answered. Now, the left is denouncing the strike. The neocons are worried Trump won't manage it correctly, and everyone is arguing about whether it will succeed, all assuming the same thing about what success means. What none of them understand is that the president's policy is a rejection of more than 100 years of geopolitics, what's known as the Great Game. And key operatives of that Great Game, like former Prince Andrew, are now on the chopping block, and that is not a coincidence. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I've been tracking how British geopolitics has subverted American foreign policy for over a century. That is, until now. So if you want to follow this fight, please hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons so we can stay in touch and expand our reach. Today, I'm going to show you 3 things that are actually one. First, why the president's strategy is leaving the neocons and the British on the sideline. Second, how the Iran strike has cracked the special relationship wide open and in public. And third, how the men who personally ran the inside of the special relationship are now under arrest. The end of geopolitics is the thread running through all of this. So let's be precise about what Bolton actually said. The Politico reporter asked Bolton, "Do you think the president and his team have fully considered all the consequences?" And Bolton said, "It would be different from his normal behavior, to say the least, because he doesn't particularly think strategically. He can swing wildly on a given issue in the course of the day, and he's obviously swung all the way from where he was in the first term to regime change, and he could swing back." But Bolton's fear isn't that Trump acted. His fear is that Trump might not finish the job on Bolton's terms. Because what he means by strategic thinking is committing the U.S. to a fully managed regime change architecture. Transition teams, Western-approved successor networks, in other words, replace one controlled regime with another, and Trump is not using that playbook. Now, here's Ann Applebaum, who's got one of the most severe...
This is an important point here, that there's equivocation happening around the phrase regime change, which has obviously become very loaded over the past 25 years for pretty obvious reasons. But assuming that all regime changes are created equal, and that someone saying, a neocon saying regime change is the same thing as Trump saying regime change, again requires some pretty strong willful ignorance, given the track record we have now with the way that Trump conducts foreign policy.
In other words, replace one controlled regime with another, and Trump is not using that playbook. Now, here's Ann Applebaum, who's got one of the most severe cases of TDS, writing in The Atlantic on the same weekend. Trump has no plan for the Iranian people. Now, apparently Ann didn't read what her own publication was about to print, because the man she said had no plan had already agreed to talk to Tehran. So one of the flagship journals of the foreign policy establishment ran both pieces in the same weekend. That tells you everything about the state of expert opinion right now. Then along came Bronwyn Maddox, the director of Chatham House. You don't do regime change from the air. Chatham House has enthusiastically justified every regime change, from Libya, Syria, Iraq to Ukraine, never once worrying about whether it could be done from the air. Their concern isn't that regime change will fail. Their concern is that it's being done without them, without their opposition networks and their transition governments. Bolton, Applebaum, Chatham House, they're all standing outside the room, and they can't even find the door. The old players are gone. The Bolton regime change architecture doesn't apply to a leadership that wasn't part of the old game. Iran's new leadership is calling Washington because Washington is the only party that actually changed anything. The British have played the great game in the shadows for over 100 years. Now it's in the open, and it's being stymied. So if you want to understand how this is unfolding, subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is below. Now let's talk about what the Iran strike did to the so-called special relationship, because this is where over 100 years of British manipulation of American policy is shattering right out in the open. When the strikes began on Saturday, Britain's position was extraordinary. The UK was informed Friday afternoon, not included. Starmer refused to let the US use the British bases in Diego Garcia or in Britain itself. Britain refused not because it developed a conscience about international law. It refused because it's no longer running the table.
Is it that in and of itself, that obviously Keir Starmer seemed very caught off guard by what was happening with this, and that they're doing this obstructionism with American foreign policy, should show you, with Trump-led American foreign policy, like all of these things should be little flags that are like, okay, this isn't business as usual. There's something else going on here. You don't have to necessarily have a cohesive conclusion about it just yet, but you should at least be like, okay, I can't just like fall into the same old, like just hitting replay on all the exact same takes with respect to the foreign policy establishment and neoconservatives and yada, 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 yada.
And the British press admitted that it is the end of the game for the special relationship, with a headline that read, "Starmer faces greater quandary over special relationship after Iran attack." And that article pointed out that Starmer appears to have had little influence on Trump, who went ahead regardless. Now, a conservative British channel put it even more bluntly in terms of the damage that's been done to the special relationship.
What are the implications, Piers Pottinger, for the special relationship in the context of Starmer's refusal to help? I don't know, but if
I don't think the Americans will forget.
No, I don't think so, and I think Trump will be, if indeed it's true that he wanted to use our bases and we didn't allow him, I think he will not forget that or forgive it.
But it wasn't just Britain. France, Germany, and the UK issued a joint statement clarifying first and foremost they did not participate in the strikes. Not a statement of strategy, a statement of absence. And the best the European Union could manage was Ursula von der Leyen sending a message to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And here's what she said. As our strategic partner, we will work closely with you to de-escalate and safeguard regional stability. You can count on our full support in these turbulent times. The European Union Gulf Cooperation Council partnership will only get stronger in the period ahead. Now, the responses to this on X were brutal. One commentator appropriately rephrased it, quote, "In other words, Trump won't take my call, and we have no clue what's going on." That's exactly right. And the statesman drilled down on the same point. The Iran war makes it official. America is breaking with Europe. So the special relationship is cracking in public. When Tehran calls, it calls Washington, not London. And the question worth asking is, how did that special relationship actually work? Not the photo ops and the state visits. What was the real mechanism?
So these are the powers that have been driving the Ukraine war, that have been fomenting all of these hostilities against Russia, using Ukraine with Ukraine's deep, deep history regarding certain peoples that happen to overlap. You've got the Ukraine-Russia, and you've got Israel-Iran. And seem to recall there's parallels between these conflicts here. And the people who have been cheerleading, driving the Ukrainian effort as much as possible, are completely sidelined and don't have any idea what's going on, and they're very sternly tut-tutting and signaling their disapproval that the United States is attacking this millennial-old enemy of Israel. Does that simple fact pattern there, does that not raise some red flags to you? That perhaps this whole thing going on with Iran has nothing to do with the Greater Israel Project?
Part of the answer is former Prince Andrew. Let's go back to 2008 when the British were still happily directing American foreign policy. Andrew, then Britain's special representative for international trade, sat down in Kyrgyzstan with a room that included businessmen, government officials, and the American ambassador. The American ambassador wrote it all down in a cable, later published by WikiLeaks. And she told people that what Andrew told the room with astonishing frankness was the following. The United Kingdom, Western Europe, and by extension, you Americans too are now back in the thick of playing the great game. And this time we aim to win. He wasn't being metaphorical. He was describing it to an American diplomat on the record, the actual operating framework of British foreign policy. Not the public version dressed up in democracy and human rights, but the real version, in his official capacity as Britain's trade representative. Now Andrew's been arrested, the first royal arrest in centuries, on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The Epstein files contain evidence he was passing confidential trade reports into Epstein's networks. So the man who bragged about winning the great game was running British strategic intelligence through Jeffrey Epstein. That is not a personal scandal. That is the operating method of the imperial apparatus, now on public record. And shortly after Andrew's arrest came the arrest of Lord Peter Mandelson, who had been appointed by Starmer as Britain's ambassador to Washington, sent to manage the special relationship at the very moment Trump came in for his second term. The Epstein files show that Mandelson was passing advanced knowledge of British financial policy into the same networks. So the geopolitical operative and the financial operative, both out on bail, arrested, both exposed at the same moment the apparatus itself is being dismantled. The Iran strike ended the special relationship, and it's out in the open. Britain is sidelined, Europe is issuing statements of absence. Tehran is calling Washington. And simultaneously, the men who ran the real special relationship, Andrew running the geopolitical side, Mandelson running the financial intelligence, are on the chopping block, taken off the board together. This is not a coincidence. This is the end of geopolitics. Now, ending an entrenched system is not easy, and it is dangerous. That is why you have to stay focused and on the stage of history. So join Promethean Action so that we can see this through to the end. This has been your Monday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com.
Okay, now I just got a couple more things here that I want to read, and then I'm going to kick off a couple of these for tomorrow to ensure I've got a little easy, low preparation content for tomorrow. Let's see. So, yeah, I am going to leave off here. Let's do this one. Read these two, and then wrap up for the night. Okay, first of all, from Dan Dolph, Dan Talks 1. We've read some of this guy's stuff before. Dan explains Iraq 2.0. As China becomes more powerful, everything in geopolitics revolves around the gravitational pull of the power struggle between the US and China. It is the underlying reason for all major decisions. I explain international politics as a prison with no guards, and that it's prison politics with suits on. What is being fought over is who is in control of the prison. The reason for this is whoever is number one in the prison maximizes their survival and their ability to influence for their own benefit, and for states, this is what they strive to achieve. What America is trying to do is to leave the Middle East and Europe so it can focus on maintaining status quo with China. As China becomes more powerful, more resources need to be devoted to this. Which means, because resources are limited, things need to be prioritized rather than having an all-encompassing power. This is the reality of power. And if you've read Bridge Colby's book, you're up to date on this matter. Iran is a pivotal bulwark member, part of the anti-Western / US alliance, and supplies China with millions of barrels of oil that are under market price because of sanctions, and thus gives China cheap energy. The US is slowly kneecapping all of China's access to cheap hydrocarbons because this is one of China's few Achilles heels that it has. Venezuela was for this reason too, and Russia will be after, thus closing the loop on almost all of China's low-cost oil and energy, which will enable the US to compete much better with them on price. Also kneecapping some of the very important mafias in China that benefit from these arrangements, the Xi faction. Iran is a large buyer of Chinese military equipment and a supplier of drones to Russia also. They are a communist country that operates as an Islamic theocracy. They are not militarily strong in the conventional sense. They're a tin-pot commie shithole run by pedos in leadership. More importantly, they are an ideological state, meaning they do not act rationally. I have a thread about this in my Realist series. They are the main funders and problem makers within the Middle East, funding the Houthis, which disrupted shipping for years, funding terrorists across the Middle East, among other issues. The nuclear issue is its own thing, where the security establishment does its best to avoid ideological rival states to get nukes if they can prevent it. I've gone over this more in detail previously. So because the US wants to leave the Middle East and focus on China, the US needs to remove them as the problem issue to leave it to its allies in the region. Because the US doesn't have the capacity to fight a three or four front war, which would be China, Middle East, and Russia, it's picking Iran now to remove so it can focus on containing China and hopefully preventing that war. Will regime change work? At the moment, there is no leader in Iran that can take up the reins, as I said last month. However, they can break the country up or try to install someone else. Either way, the main priority is removing their nuke capacity and kneecapping cheap Iranian oil to China, removing their capacity to operate so the US can focus on China itself. The protests are unfortunate, but rather a cosmetic reason rather than the real reasons, which I outlined as to why the US is doing this. It's much bigger than protests. I wish the Persians the best, though. This was written on February 18th. And then he says, for those wondering the real reasons why we are going to war with Iran. And then let me get one last thing here. These kind of go together. I'll talk about those tomorrow. Some evidence of, number one, how isolated Iran is in the region. All the dogs that aren't barking. Also, some strong evidence of a split in Iranian leadership between the regular army and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Also, the Moscow-Tehran axis is falling apart before our eyes. I got some interesting things on that. But the last one that I'm going to touch on here today, we'll also talk about the shipping insurance and the role that Lloyd's of London is playing. We'll talk about some of that tomorrow. But the last thing I want to read here tonight is this one from The Observer. For those crashing out and unable or unwilling to understand the Trump administration's rationale here, for the past 125 years, the British Empire has maintained a strategic stranglehold on the Middle East through a calculated policy of geopolitical and financial destabilization. Operating on the imperial maxim of geopolitics and divide and rule, British policymakers have systematically manipulated religious and ethnic tensions to prevent the emergence of sovereign industrialized nation-states in the region. A primary mechanism for this destabilization was the artificial redrawing of Middle Eastern borders following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Through the secret Sykes-Picot Accord and the subsequent Treaty of Sèvres, the British and French carved up the region into colonial mandates, ensuring that countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine were designed with built-in ethnic and religious conflicts. To manage this volatile arrangement, British intelligence utilized operatives like T.E. Lawrence and Aubrey Herbert as specialists to steer diverse Middle Eastern proxy movements and keep the region in a chronic state of shipwreck. The creation of modern Middle Eastern borders and states was intended to serve as a perpetual irritant, keeping local populations at each other's throats as pawns in a much larger imperial game. Rather similar to what happened with the original 13 colonies and their outgrowth into the United States. Iran, historically known as Persia, has been a central target of these British imperial designs. As early as 1907, King Edward VII orchestrated the Anglo-Russian Entente, which explicitly divided Iran into spheres of influence and neutralized its autonomy to check rival powers. Financial warfare was weaponized alongside diplomacy. For instance, in 1911, the British issued a major loan to Persia using the nation's own opium revenues as collateral, effectively hooking the state into colonial debt. The British oligarchy also maintained control over Iran's vast resources through allied institutions like the British Bank of the Middle East. Following World War II, the British desperately sought to retain their grip on Middle Eastern oil reserves to underwrite their financial empire. When figures like Italian leader Enrico Mattei attempted to negotiate fair, independent energy deals with Middle Eastern nations, including Iran, the British Foreign Office viewed him as a mortal threat to their colonial relationships and oil control. Mattei was ultimately assassinated in a plot with heavy British fingerprints. Today, the enduring conflicts in the Middle East, including the hostility between Iran and Israel, are direct outgrowths of this old European strategy of divide and rule. Modern globalist factions, aligned with British banking and intelligence networks, have continued to stoke these proxy wars to prevent Eurasian economic integration. By hyping threats like the Shia Crescent and weaponizing sanctions, these forces aim to keep Iran isolated and the region chaotic. The perpetual threat of Iranian nuclear enrichment has served as a convenient boogeyman to justify endless intervention and keep the military-industrial complex funded. The British and their allies understand that if major regional powers were allowed to stabilize and independently develop their oil and infrastructure, such as the massive rail and energy corridors currently being built by Russia and China through Iran, the City of London's financial control over global energy markets would collapse. End British meddling, restore order to the region. And this is a really important thing. The City of London's financial control over global energy markets. So tomorrow we will talk a little bit more about that alongside some other things, and who knows what might come up between now and then to work its way into the stack for tomorrow. But that is restore order. Patrick Casey mentioned. Hold on.
I've got bad news for you. You're Jewish.
Oh no! I'm Jewish. Ah! Yes. So that is it for tonight. Reminder: there will be a Labe tomorrow. I've left myself enough to talk about that. I'll be able to get in and at least do maybe a brief one. It'll probably wind up being long, but might be a little briefer. We'll see. But there will be a Labe tomorrow, and that will be the last one for about a week because I am going to be going out of town, going up to the DC area. There will be no DC meetup this time. Got too much other stuff going on. But please do join the King Pill Discord. Come join us over there. Download the EWBSX app and enjoy the tunes, the audio entertainment being pumped into your little baby ear holes. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions tonight, whether it was through Kick, the kicks, the subscriptions, the tips, all of those things. If you'd like to support the show, you can do it anytime by going to tips.kingpill.com, or you can go to Cash App or Venmo. More kicks! Thank you, Nematoder. Patriots, sir. You can go to Cash App or to Venmo, and more kicks. Cash App or Venmo at King Pilled for both of those. You guys are the ones who keep me in business, who keep my family fed, who keep a roof over our heads, and I appreciate you all more than I can say. And I can say on behalf of Mrs. Kingpilled that she feels the same way. Thank you, Nematoder. Just kicking me over and over again. You patriot. So thank you to all of you. I will see you guys tomorrow. Make sure you go share the show. Go get it in front of someone that you think will enjoy it. And I will be back tomorrow. Until then, I leave you with Hulk.
When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next president of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania